call this Planning Commission meeting for July 9th to order. We'll start with the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance
to the flag of the United States of America, to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, roll call. Commissioner Moore?
Present.
Commissioner Fung?
Present.
Commissioner Takahashi?
Here.
Vice Chair Saxena?
Here.
Chairperson Wong?
here.
All present. Thank you.
All right, thanks a lot. Do we have any oral communications? Looks pretty empty. Welcome to summer. So
Approval of minutes.
let's do approval minutes. Let's take a look here. All right, let's take a look at our minutes. Okay, is there a motion to move to approve the minutes, or are there any questions, comments? All right, a motion.
Yeah, I move that we approve the minutes as submitted.
I second.
Okay, any discussion on minutes? All right, we'll set a vote. All in favor and start the vote. Okay, minutes pass 5-0-0. Okay, going to oral communications. Looks like we don't have anything at the moment.
No cards.
No cards, all right. Written communications, any letters? Okay. Anything on the consent calendar? Nope. All right, we'll jump into our study session then. We are continuing off, for those that are following on TV, we're following up our objective standards. We have two phases, phase 1 and phase 2. Let the commissioners take some time to take a look at the phase 1 changes and revisions provided by staff. Any comments that you want to provide? Seth, Ben?
Yeah, sure. Good evening, Commissioners. So as you know, at the last meeting, you reviewed what we referred to as the phase 1 items for proposing amendments to the city's general plan and zoning code, addressing zoning and design review standards. Those phase 1 items are indicated in attachment 1 to the staff report, and again, they focus on sort of near-term amendments and changes that can be made and forwarded to the council. So tonight, we'd like your review of that attachment and your confirmation of your recommendations at the last meeting, so that those can be forwarded. In addition, you created a new phase 1.5, which took some, I believe, 3 of the items from phase 2 of this endeavor and moved them up to a higher priority to be addressed along with phase 1. And those were items 8, 20, and 52 from attachment 3 to the staff report, which you'll be discussing tonight. And that brings me to the phase 2 list, which again is attachment 3. This contains public comments, including comments by the commission and council members and members of the public on longer-term policy changes the city could undertake to address objective standards in its general plan and zoning code. So you'll note that on page 3 of the staff report, there are once again 3 sort of framing questions for the discussion tonight, which you may consider, and I'll read them for purposes of the video. Number 1, does the Planning Commission wish to forward its recommendations regarding Phase 1 and Phase 1.5 to City Council for consideration? Number 2, does the Planning Commission wish to recommend for inclusion in Phase 1 or Phase 1.5 a review of previously adopted mitigation measures to identify those generally applicable to new development and development of an objective method for imposing them while avoiding burdening classes of projects to which they would not apply? And 3, does the Planning Commission have direction or any prioritization with respect to the remaining topics to be evaluated as part of the Phase 2 process? Before you begin discussion, I would like to point out that second item I just read refers to a paragraph in the staff report I want to draw your attention to at the bottom of the last full paragraph at the bottom of page 2. I believe this is an item that staff and City Attorney's Office recommended for consideration for phase one, and I don't believe you reached it at the last meeting, so you may want to include that in your discussion tonight.
Okay, thank you, Consulting Attorney Petta. Let's see. So I'd like to make a recommendation in terms of how we attack this. I think let's look at phase one on its own, see if there's anything that we want to change. This is the one that's heading to City Council, and I think, has everybody had a chance to go through these recommendations prior to the meeting? Okay. Any suggestions as we go through each one? I think we hit most of them, but we got a little tired towards the last part, so there might be some things that we want to do. But anyone with any comments to what has been changed or placed here? I think the staff captured most of it well, so I'm not just making sure everyone's okay with it.
So just to be sure here, there was a there was a notation here regarding footnote 3, and just so that's super clear here, can we go through what the example is, the case of where height or setback would change upon review to something that would be different than what you might have expected prior to looking at the outstanding standards? I know that the dialogue we had about this last time focused on the ambiguity was that something could be taller, but I'm just curious whether that actually exists or not.
I'm sure that exists, but if you're asking for specific examples of where it is in the city, no, we don't have that as an exhibit or available for discussion tonight.
Okay.
All right. If there are no other questions, maybe we can get phase one approved.
Right. Actually, so I have one other comment. In the capture of the Planning Commission recommendations, that would also be in this item. We were split on, let's see, I put tags on here, but they cover them up. The notation that's written in here said, it was a reference to form-based code. It says, but do not recommend pursuing form-based code. I think we were actually split on that. So, I think that if we could, I don't know whether we want to reflect that as a straw poll result or what, but.
Yeah, let's do that. Let's reflect that as a straw poll result. And so can we just do a quick poll as to who is for and against form-based code, and we'll just note that down, if that's okay. All right, let's do that. So I'll just start the vote, and then this is a vote on form-based code, and where are we on that?
So if we are voting yes, we are supporting or opposing the form-based code?
I was going to clarify that as well. So voting yes would be to leave what is on the proposal, to not pursue form-based code. Voting no is to say you would want the form-based code language back into the document.
Okay.
So if I could clarify, voting yes would be
Keep it what's in proposed.
will be keeping the proposed, which is that a form-based code could implement the most comprehensive set objectives, right? Voting no would be a no. You don't believe that form-based code could implement.
Actually, that's the opposite. So in the proposed column, adopt development and design guidelines that can objectively be applied to any housing development or mixed-use development in phase 2, but do not recommend pursuing form-based code. That's where we are on the next page, page 4. So if that helps. That's voting yes.
So I wonder whether it's sufficient just to note, I don't know that we need to vote on it, or to say that we're only passing this one. This is a study session again. So I think we should just, it's sufficient to say, hey, this was a split.
I don't think it was. I think we should let's record the votes. Let's record the votes.
Well, but I think that what needs to be recorded is, in fact, that there was a difference of opinion. Not. That's what's happening is you'll lose that if you say we're really going to use this wording or that wording. Right?
How would you suggest?
Oh, I would just say that there was a difference of opinion on this. If you want to say, I think that there is value for the council to see things that were, 5 and 0 versus 3 and 2. Yeah.
Okay. So you'd just rather note that it's a 3-2?
I'm not even sure
Whatever-
whether that,
or just
whether
a
it was
split
that.
in
I
decision.
know that I was,
Split, yeah, just
yeah.
note that.
Okay.
Yes.
I disagree with that. And also, I'm a little concerned about, how we're wording this vote as well. And with the form-based code, you lose your underlying zoning, and that's an issue that I have with this. And we saw this problem happen with the specific plan for Valco. And for that reason, I do not support the form-based code.
Right, which is just not anything we didn't just say.
Yeah. Yeah. I
Oh,
mean,
your mic's not on, sorry.
Yeah.
That's okay. Okay. All right, so is there a objection to identifying who was split? Is there we just want to notify that it's 3-2? Is that kind of what we want to do? I mean, what?
we should confirm that it's 3-2. I know that I'm one vote in favor of that, but.
Well, no, we voted
3,
before.
whatever,
Last time
but-
it was 3-2.
But I think that that's actually that's the critical thing to capture, is that there was a difference of opinion on this. I don't think there were notable difference of opinion on the other items here. One could say, yeah, maybe you wanted, I think that noting where there's a difference of opinion is useful for items coming up from a study session. Because I would, from a council standpoint, I would give different consideration if it were unanimous.
Let's just do the vote. I mean, it'll be easier. I mean,
Well,
you'll see it.
So if we record the vote, I guess if that is amended into this text,
terms
then
of-
that would be, yeah,
In terms of the actual results of the vote.
yeah.
Right.
That's all we're doing. Okay. I will vote. Start your vote.
Okay, we better, let's reconfirm one more time just exactly what.
Voting yes means you're agreeing with the language that's in the proposed column on page 4. Voting no means that you don't agree with the language. Yes means take out the form-based code. No means include form-based code. Does that make sense? Okay.
And let's make sure that when this is amended, that it captures that.
I'd like to make a clarification here that this is not a motion.
Not a motion.
I think no one's suggesting that.
Right.
And that the point here is that the vote will appear in the recommendation that goes to the council. Yeah, so
Correct.
for full transparency.
For full transparency. So, all right, there we go.
I'm trying to think of, voting no is,
It means it's a
No means you want
consideration.
form-based code.
No, it means it should be a consideration.
Should be a consideration.
Should be
Should be a consideration. Actually, yeah, no, should be a
Right.
consideration.
Not.
Correct.
We're not
Yes.
supporting form-based code.
yes.
Okay. Everyone good? That looks like good. Okay. Okay. Since that's our only area of contention, can we make a motion to? So the recommended action, right, is to take this suggestion list to City Council for their consideration in their next meeting. Is that correct? Just to make sure. Okay. And a motion to do so would then carry this phase 1 piece forward as objective standards, and then we can work on the other parts of that study session. Is that correct?
It was my understanding from the last meeting that it is not the city's practice to move on study session items, but rather to present the
Then we're good.
minutes and.
Okay. So we can conclude this part on phase 1 and move to phase 1.5. Or in phase 1.5 are items in phase 2 we want to pull forward for consideration in phase 1. Is that correct? I'll make sure everyone has the same understanding. Okay. Let's look at phase 1.5. And the good news is we actually have these big sheets that city staff printed. So pop on here. Commissioner Moore.
It was already mentioned that we were interested in pulling item 8, 20, and 52 previously, and I would like to expand item 52 to include the entire section on parks. I think we are leaving too many sections out, and they might want to discuss the whole topic. So I would suggest 47 through 54, which is all generally discussing the parkland requirement.
Yeah, and I just want to double check with consulting attorney Petta, when do we bring in any kind of public comment?
So at the last meeting, we determined that due to the length of these items and this informal study session format, that the chair can choose when to your public comment.
Okay. I think we finished phase 1, and so I didn't know if there was any comment on phase 1, so I'll probably just bring in a comment on here. So, Jennifer Griffin, please come to the dais.
Yes, let me just make a comment since I was confused. Under no circumstances was form-based code to be discussed or voted upon because it was not publicized to the public. I'm glad that it did not pass. I object vehemently to that wording, to being, I understand you did a vote on it. I think it's going to be struck out, but this is how we wind up with things in our city codes that nobody has a clue. I am so sick of form-based code. That thing has been shoved down our throat since that silly Valco thing 2 years ago that wasted all of our time. I'm so smart because I use form-based code. I'm like Mr. La-di-da. I have a PhD and I do form-based code. I'm sorry. I programmed in Java and HTML and C and C++ and assembly. So I don't need to be told how stupid I am because I don't understand form-based code and because I'm so stupid that I think it's a programming language. Let's get off form-based code. It's not the be-all and the end-all. Why does it have to be that when no one's here, we start sticking stuff like form-based code? Yeah, I have a cousin in Virginia Beach, and I just found out that their city may implement form-based code, but nobody knows what the heck it is, and the travesty, if form-based code produced that travesty that is supposed to be built at Valco, then I think we need to shove it. I talked to people about the form-based code and I was talked down to, like I'm so stupid that I didn't understand it. Yeah, I may be older, but I was a programmer in my day. So let's get off of it. Maybe we need to have a class for the whole city in form-based code, but I do not want to hear that. It's like YIMBY. I don't want to hear that word mentioned again, because it's being held above the people of Cupertino as something to show how stupid we are. Well, let's get off form-based code. And, I'm sorry. The rest of our city was built with normal building code. And until the day we commit to form-based code, we can certainly rebuild Flint Center without form-based code. Because as far as I'm concerned, the things that the form-based code built, which is what they want to build at Valco, is a complete disaster. And I don't know where the setbacks are. Oh, you're going to have little trees here. And I'm like, let's give it a break. Anyway, I'm glad you voted it down, but let's just get off of the form-based code cloud. I don't know, I'm sorry, I'm upset. I don't know what you wanted me to talk about, but I will certainly come back again. What did you want me to speak on?
No, you put an item down on form-based code, and
I believe I wanted to speak on phase 1 and then the phase 2, because I can tell you, I have got a lot of stuff to talk about. I don't even know why we're here tonight defending the ethics of our city against stuff that's coming down from Sacramento. Yeah, we're defending our way of life. Thank you.
thank you. We've got a technical glitch with the timer number here, but apparently the display works, but everything else, the sound seems to be okay. The display does not work, so just for anybody paying attention there. So it's kind of weird. But at least the timer works, so we can hear it. We can't see it, so. Okay. All right, then moving on to phase two.
Well-
Oh, go ahead. I see.
So I'd actually, when we put some of these items into phase 1.5, we did that without any discussion about the phase 2 items that they were being drawn from. So I have a question. I don't think that point 8 is pretty ambiguous. There are two sections to it. One part talks about having, kind of conforming the requirements. The first sentence with table LU1. I have no issue with that. I mean, I think that that's actually, one of the important focuses here is to make sure that there is consistency. However, there's a second part there that says, create residential specifically zoned areas outside of mixed use clearly defined, which isn't clear. It's not clear to me what that means. There are some staff comments there that do raise the question about whether those are, in some interpretation, whether those are something that actually can be done or not. So I think that there's probably 2 points there. And I would ask that we consider removing that, or, demoting it back to phase 2.
For the record, what's in phase 1.5, so everybody knows?
Yeah.
Currently, I believe it's points 8, 20, and 52.
Commissioner Moore?
Well, I do not want to see item 8 struck. And the reason why is because it's addressing Valco area, and there is some ambiguity about what the height requirement is. I know that the environmental impact report located some information saying that the height requirement was 85 feet for the planned regional shopping area, and that it was 30 feet for the planned general commercial area. And I don't know if that really is something that's going to hold up, or if we would be better off having City Council set some height requirements there, through
So
that
I have no issue with that part, but I think that the last sentence there is very problematic. It's not clear, the staff comment actually refers to, this is actually a significant change to the way the special areas are set up, because this would seem to establish, I don't know, it may be trying to establish a residential only zone. It's not clear how you would have something that was residential specifically. Again, grammatically, I'm not quite sure what's going on there, and still be mixed use. So I think it's ambiguous, probably not actionable on that basis. I have no problem with a reconciliation of requirements that's in the first part.
Can you be more specific about that? I'm a little bit confused. So, what part is it the reduction in density point on the comment notes, or is it the comment piece where?
What is,
The
so
second-
the interesting question is,
Right.
what is residentially specifically zoned areas outside of mixed use? What does that, I mean, that's not something that I would put into the short-term actionable items, because that's clearly a change from.
Oh, Commissioner Moore?
Well, to me, if you have an area that's zoned simply residential, there are some concerns about these residential areas which have the ground floor retail, which ends up being restaurant, and we've had a lot of turnover with that, so I can understand why some people might be interested in having a residential-only area and move the commercial and the retail into its own area. Just for instance, having been over to Santa Clara Square recently, where they have they have the flat parking and Whole Foods and all, and it's all, it's a very human scale. And then they've separated out the commercial areas at a higher height and residential also separated out. So I think that having some mechanism where we can, follow what, give the opportunity to have that type of zoning, I think is a worthwhile endeavor.
Actually, I want to better understand what this line means. Create residential specifically zoned area outside of mixed use clearly defined. So probably there are some connecting words missing there, because I didn't fully understand the intent of that. So the city staff, could you just clarify?
So city staff did not create that list. This list is taken from the public, commission, city council. We'll simply put all together into one table and create a separate section so you can see how these items could fit into a greater area. For example, planning areas, land use, and what have you, right? So I can't really comment on the intent of these comments.
Commissioner Moore, do you have?
I think what it is to allow flexibility for the city council to come up with some decisions about what they want our zoning to look like, rather than dictating to them from the planning commission. Let them, be the decision makers.
If I read this grammatically, we see three separate things, right? One is, right, have three requirements for all specific plan areas, such as height, right, decreased density to match the table and allocations in table LU1. And I think we all have agreement on that. That's okay, right? The second part is remove expired allocations, and I think we're all okay with that too. Is that, I see everyone nodding their heads, okay? Good. Create residentially specifically zoned areas outside of mixed use clearly defined. I think it's the grammatical way that's written. If it just read create residentially specifically zoned areas, that's the challenge, I see. Outside of mixed use.
Right, because, in particular, because the special areas, if this is intended to target Valco, for instance, that is a change in the plan.
I don't know
There
if it's
is no-
intended to target Valco or any specific area. I would say, I like, for example, I'd be worried about any shopping district that got converted into a mixed retail area where we didn't actually have any kind of restrictions in place. Like take any shopping mall. We don't have these anymore, but I'll name names that don't exist, like Albertsons, right? It doesn't exist here anymore, right?
Right,
Or an
but
Aldi.
there was a comment early on by Commissioner Moore that this does apply to Valco.
Yeah.
So, I mean, we just have to.
I understand, it could apply to all those regions as well, but that's the point, so.
So I think that if the purpose here is to identify things that are phase one recommendations that can be acted upon quickly, and phase two things which could not be acted upon quickly, this is clearly in the category of something that would not be something you could act on quickly.
Oh, why is that? Why is that?
Yeah, actually,
Because
that's
it
what I
is-
want to understand.
Because it's a full change to the existing land use definition, right? And I think that you would need to be thoughtful about that.
Why would it be a change to the land use definition?
Because today, there is no such thing as a
With the residential.
residentially specifically zoned area in a mixed use. When you're mixed use, you're mixed use.
Well, actually, it says outside of mixed use.
Yeah. Like, there's like, it's for designated residential only.
Well, but residential areas are residential now. So there's not an issue.
Okay, I guess if I were to interpret the multiple intents here, it means that in a mixed zone area, if there is a subpart which is residential, it should have some height restrictions. Is that what we're thinking about, or?
If it's a mixed-use area under the current definitions that exist in the city, then that sub-area doesn't exist. And that would be, if the council wants to have that discussion, they should. It is a phase two item, and I think that's what the staff comment is reflecting, that the current definitions have a certain meaning. This is a change to that meaning.
Commissioner Moore.
If you would like to move the last item outside of item 8 and retain the first 2 or 3, the have requirements for all specific plan areas such as height, decreased density to match the allocations in table LU1, remove expired allocations, and then end it there, and then we can move off the third item.
Yeah, actually, I don't like the phrase decrease density. I think we should say that the LU1 is the canonical representation and everything should match. So, like, that, I think that's the intent here, that we should have conformity and not have multiple standards around. So
So what you're saying is you want to have consistency within the general plan, which we
Yes.
have to by law do, so I
Yes.
definitely agree with that.
yeah, so but
Okay.
the decrease phase, I think, looks unnecessarily.
Okay, so if you'd like
There's
to
an
reword
implication,
it.
there's an implication with that wording.
Which
I agree.
that is the intent here.
So, again, I think just because of the complications here, I
what-
don't have a problem with the three earlier sections. I think that is actually the normal act. I mean, again, this is just what the staff is going to be doing anyway. So, I would agree as well. The issue around conforming is more important than, decrease. For instance, this wording would not allow you to increase something that was incorrectly documented. So, I don't know, I think we should drop this.
Well, instead of dropping it, let's suggest it this way. Have requirements for all specific plan areas such as height, density, conform with allocations in table LU1, and removed expired allocations. And just leave it there.
Yeah.
Is that correct? Are you okay with that, Commissioner Fung? Okay, if we have an agreement there, let's keep that. Now, the next question is, are you guys okay with moving this to 1? Is there any objections to moving this to phase 1 point? We move to 1 or 1.5? Or is 1.5 the thing? You were trying to move to 1?
Yeah. I think this, I would say this should be 1. It's pretty straightforward, well-defined, and it's just fixing things. I don't see there's much ambiguity there.
I think our recommendations, I believe the original intent of the recommendations were to move it to 1.5, and it's up to council to determine if they're going to move it up to 1. I believe that's what I think that's what we're agreed on. So I want to make sure that's, and everybody, we have an agreement here as well. Okay.
So the only thing I would say then is that there is that other, are we then removing that other, the other line, the create residentially specifically zoned areas outside of mixed use? Is that going to be completely removed now?
That's a great question. Do we want to leave that in the leftover 8 for phase 2? Or, I mean, it's phase 2. So that's the question we're asking. Do you want to leave the remainder, last sentence here, create residentially specifically zoned areas outside of mixed use clearly defined in phase 2 and leave it as number 8?
I would recommend we ask for clarity as to exactly what the intent of that sentence is, because it's not clear, and I think that's part of why we're all kind of struggling with it, so.
Do we know who the source is? That's the other problem, because they're soliciting for
That's a
public
good
comments,
question.
which is why I don't know
That's
what
a
we
very
can do
good
with that.
question.
Yeah,
So-
I think it would be best to us to keep it there, but ask for clarification instead of just removing it, because there might be some other intent which you're not getting here, which,
Okay, let's leave it for now. Okay, is there any objection to leaving it for now until we figure out who suggested that? And if you did, please, send us an email, send it to the planning commission, or, send a note. So city staff as well. I think that would help. 20 is the next one, right? Policy for ELIs, is that where we're at?
May I ask
No,
a
go ahead,
question?
Commissioner Moore.
Okay, I have a question on this one. So we have policy for extremely low income housing, but I don't see something about housing for the developmentally disabled. And if it's not somewhere else, is that something we would like to add on to item 20 and consider moving that whole item to 1.5?
ELI and developmentally disabled are two separate topics, right? They should be, I think it'd be a separate topic, would probably make sense. I don't know if anyone has any objection to that. And then the second point is, where does it fit? That's a different question. So.
Oh, well, from our guest speakers who have talked about this, the developmentally disabled end up fitting into the extremely low income category, and that would be the reason why you could say that it fits into the ELI item number.
so we're proposing sort of a subcategory within the ELI in some way.
Was that by, I can't remember, I'm trying to remember that reference. Is that by definition, or is that
Essentially,
generally based upon the situation?
it's based on the situation. What I've heard is the income is about $900 per month for somebody who is developmentally disabled, which puts them into the ELI category.
I would say that ELI is a category of participation, and you'd have other participants in classes like developmentally disabled that also might fit in that.
Right.
So we probably should make that like kind of a subsection to that, if you're going to do that. like such as development is. Commissioner Fung.
Well, I was just going to comment, this is, something that's actually being actively worked on in the Housing Commission. The other thing I would say is, that there's been advocacy, active advocacy in Cupertino for, for the developmentally disabled, the other notable ELI categories, homeless, transitional homeless. So, I think that there's a discussion to be had that's, on a, I wouldn't bunch them together too much, but I think that the way that by having, opening an ELI category, that will probably address the subgroups as well.
Am I missing any other subgroups? Anyone want to advocate for any other subgroups over here?
Yes. So we have item 19, policy for shelters, but it doesn't address battered women's shelters. It's just saying shelters in general. And so you have homeless shelters, but there's also victims of domestic violence, which aren't being addressed here.
So it sounds like we're adding some clarity to item 19. We're on the way here. So battered women, victims of domestic violence. It sounds like on 20, policies for ELIs, including classes such as on your end.
Yeah.
Well, you don't want to add those classes?
We just run into a problem here where we don't want to enumerate everything,
Right.
thereby creating an exclusion.
Right. So,
Whereas if you say ELI and shelters,
or you could word it, for example, right,
Such as.
such as, right.
Or
If you-
including but not limited to.
right,
yes.
right. I think that we
That's
definitely
fine.
need to go that route.
Yeah, no, that was the intent. That was the intent. No, that was the intent.
Right.
That was the intent.
Or you can leave it as is, since the word shelter and ELI does include all categories. But it's entirely up to you. I'm just pointing that out.
Do you want to add categories and exclude someone, or do you not add categories and be ambiguous?
I-
That's really the question. Sorry.
Yeah.
Commissioner.
I would prefer that we add the categories because it elevates the importance of those issues.
Okay. Anybody have a different opinion?
As long as we're using the such as.
Such as, for example, okay. All right, let's add those categories. Any? Oh, yeah, okay. All right. What was the last one that we were trying to put into 1.5?
Well,
And we haven't talked about moving this one yet
Yeah.
either, I understand.
so I think I have some problems with 52. It is unclear. I think the scope of 52 is large. I would offer as a alternative 53 is narrow in scope. So,
I think those are two different topics, though, 52 and 53.
53 talks about, 53 is focused on understanding the parkland dedication. Parkland dedication policy, which is closed in scope. 52 is trying to create definitions for, size and shape requirement for a park is going to be extremely non-trivial to do. You're just going to have to, for instance, you could write a policy that very easily excludes, what do you call it? The
Rooftop parks, maybe?
The park on Lawrence Mitty, for
Lawrence
instance, would easily be excluded if you tried to generically define size and shape. So I think that, again, it's nothing wrong with having a discussion. However, I would say that that particular discussion, this particular item is broad in scope and it would be difficult to be,
Can
handle
I
it.
ask city staff a question? Acting Director Fu. When we define a park today, is there something that says it's got to be contiguous? Does it have anything that says it's got to be on a flat slope? Does it say anything about it has to be accessible to the public through all normal hours? Do we have any guidelines like that today? Because I can't remember. So. Or
So these issues are actually being litigated right now.
no, I'm not talking about that. I'm like, what is a park, right?
Yeah, so.
That's being litigated right now.
Yeah, so we'd recommend that we don't
Okay.
actually discuss any detail of these topics, but,
No,
just
I'm-
refer to them by number and the text
Yeah,
that's
no, I'm
given
just
on
trying to figure out,
the
like,
diagram.
what is do we know what is a park? Like, do we have a city code that says, here's what's parkland?
I'm sure we can read to you what the city code says if you'd like. I can pull it up.
So we do have that, okay. Just want to make sure,
Vice Mayor Chow has really been championing, looking into the parkland situation that we have in the city and park deficient areas. And personally, I would just take the entire group, 47 to 54, on parks, send it all up into 1.5 and let them decide what is important.
Yeah. So I also agree that there are many things here that are overlapping. This was an area where I think input came from many people. However, that puts it clearly into the category where it should be phase 2. This is not something that, of course, the council can always take up anything they want, but I think here the recommendation is, if there was a question of something being ambiguous, if there was not if ambiguous or not objective, then we had an opportunity here to identify the things that would be priorities to work on, not, to identify a priority policy change. I think that this is getting into the priority policy change. In particular, there are many places here where a number of these points touch on the Quimby Act. They actually have the intent of the Quimby Act backwards. So, there are a bunch of things here where they're going to be interplay with state law. The Quimby Act, it's interesting. We often talk about it as being aspirational, to have three acres per 1,000 residents. In fact, the Quimby Act does actually create a state limit. You can't require more than 3 acres per 1,000 residents. So I think that it's worthy of consideration, worthy of thinking about, having this be something that's looked at, but it's not a fast track item.
Any other comments, Commissioner Takahashi?
Yeah, I would agree, just from the standpoint of there's a lot of complexities associated with parkland use, including going back to definitions, which...
I see a lot of those here.
Right, and those are not trivial in terms of ensuring that what we come up with is compliant with state law. So I would agree, it's not something that's a quick, this isn't there are inconsistencies, but the end solution is going to require a pretty well thought out assessment and recommendation. And the city council, I think, has, this is a high priority for them, so they can bring it up and work it and give it to staff to work. But it is definitely a big job, I believe.
So your thought process is that if the city council is interested in bringing this or elevating it, they'll do that on their own?
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, given what I have heard from the residents in our things and offline, I think the issue of parks and the inequality and no action on that has been a sore point with the residents for quite some time. I think in deference to that, I would say it's better to keep them in 1.5, where we recognize that it's not a trivial thing to do and will require more thought, but still acknowledge the fact that it is of importance to many of our residents and the city council. So I would recommend to keep it in 1.5. We're clearly differentiating between 1 and 1.5, as 1.5 being something which probably will require more time than the ones. So if that's the case, then we might as well keep it there. That's what I would suggest.
Commissioner Moore?
Just as a reminder, when we were doing the CIP approval, we had a caveat that there was the parkland equity was not consistent, right? And I'm kind of surprised that I'm seeing a backtrack on not addressing it and putting it in 1.5 here. And then if parkland is indeed in litigation, to me that's a red flag that it definitely needs to be addressed by City Council.
Okay. Any comments from staff? And I'll get back to you, Commissioner Fong, about parklands. Okay. There's been on my end, I agree with some of the conversations with residents about parks. There's been a severe deficit of parklands on the east side, and types of parklands and quality of the parks. And so I think it's a huge issue, so we'll see.
The only other comment I would say is, again, I would draw a distinction here between, trying to have a better, a clearer policy around parkland is I think, desirable to all. It's just, within the scope of this discussion, I'm not sure that it's that's even a 1.5 thing. Another area, and this is touched on in a number of the points here, was around the difference between a recreational facility and parkland as well, and that's something that is actually not very well defined in the code. So that would be something I think would be, that would be an example for me. That would be one that I would say would have a little bit more importance to look at. And again, this is something that's, in terms of the, a project that's seeking approval will have a parkland dedication requirement. So one element of that is, if somebody decides to meet with that with a swimming facility, that is actually extremely ambiguous right now.
Commissioner Moore?
Well, if we go back to, some of the things which put our objective standards analysis in play, we're looking at the 200 or so housing bills which have been coming through this year, and also we have the previous ones that have been pushed through, which will greatly increase our population, and we will have more impacts on the existing parks, and the areas of the city which are being impacted are the east side, which are already park deficient. And again, for that reason and the others I've stated, I really think this needs to go to City Council to be looked at.
Okay, it sounds like we got a split decision here again. Do you guys want to note it the same way? Does that sound like a good way to do it, or? It sounds like you do, Commissioner Fung, okay. Commissioner Takashi?
Yeah, I mean,
Sorry,
again, my
you're off.
concern really is just more that a thorough assessment be completed.
I don't disagree with any of the
Yeah,
issues that are
whether or
raised
not
here.
we call it 1.5 or 2 is not my issue as much as
Yeah.
it's an area that needs close attention, and that's really my main point.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Commissioner Takashi and Commissioner Fang. At the same time, I feel from a messaging point of view, I would like to recognize it and put it in 1.5, which clearly separates it from 1, but also makes it clear that we also agree with the importance as shared by the council and so many other residents.
Yeah, I was just gonna, maybe the way we can move forward is that we all agree it's a priority from the standpoint of city council assessment, with the footnote or caveat that there are a lot of elements that need very close attention.
In general, the Planning Commission agrees that the parks issue is a significant issue. As to the priority and when that prioritization occurs, there's a split vote that suggests it be in 1.5 versus 2. Is that what you're saying?
No. More just that maybe the path forward is, okay, the fact that we're acknowledging that it is a priority kind of says it's 1.5. However, the caveat to that is that it's a complex issue that's going to require a lot of work.
Okay.
And that's my point.
So you're okay with recognizing it as
Right.
1.5,
Exactly.
but making sure we appropriately study it so
Right.
that we've addressed the issues and avoided some unintended consequences.
Exactly. Well worded.
Working on it. Commissioner Moore.
Well, we are looking at the housing bills, which may be approved, and you could have a plan delivered to the city after October 1st that'll have, 2,000 or 3,000 residential units in it. And if we don't put something in place in order to take care of 6,000 plus residents, then I don't think we've done this issue justice at all.
Commissioner Fung. All right, sounds like you want to jump in.
Well, I don't know that we trying to rush to, I think everybody recognizes there are many, many priorities. I don't think I don't think you can rush to a solution on this one, in a very short period that won't have, does potentially have some, negative effects. And I would offer up again, I think 53. I did submit 53 here. That is much more closed. Perhaps it is important to identify the things that look at the existing policy and identify the places where that has ambiguity. And that's different than trying to resolve the problems of to answer these questions. But, you know, I think that, I mean, certainly there are comments that are coming up, even independently of this. I think that it's possible to recognize that you know, I think that across the many items here, this one at Park, having better clarity with Parkland is a pretty high interest here.
Okay. I'd like to suggest that we leave this as 1.5 with the caveats, though, that we talked about earlier. Hopefully, someone doing recording transcription can capture it exactly like that again. But is that okay with everybody? So the whole parkland issue, the whole park subgrouping of, make sure I get the numbers correct here.
47 to 54.
47 to 54 is elevated to 1.5 with the understanding that it is a complex issue that may have, if not well thought through, may have like undue consequences. So.
And then just to keep the fun going on, having reviewed all of the phase 2 in that light, I'd like to suggest that we consider moving 55 up into phase 1.5. 55 is a I don't know. People may see this in different ways. I believe that what I would the way I would position this is to say that there are some ambiguities. I would see some ambiguities about which impact fees you would pay if you were building certain kinds of things, and that it would be worth making sure that that's clear. And I think that that's actually short-term item. So there are questions about, you know, who pays. Does a BMR unit, for instance, pay BMR fee? You know, that should be pretty obvious. I think that in my discussion with the applicant for the public storage, you know, there was a question about why is it that he was surprised that he had to pay the TIF impact fee at the same rate that an office building would, even though he has no employees, people, or anything. And they didn't raise an issue with that. But normally, for instance, parking garages and storage facilities
Should not pay that.
would have a different rate.
Yeah, it's a different rate.
Well, they have a rate, but it's different.
It's different rates.
So I think that just having that be clear is actually probably a pretty easy effort and one that brings some value.
Commissioner Moore?
I am not ready to move the impact fees up to City Council at this point. I think that, you know, we have some various commissions, the Housing Commission, for instance, which had been looking at accessory dwelling units and the fees there. Each one of these items needs to be addressed. And you actually even have ADUs in this list as well. And the fees were not changed. So I would keep this at item 2 and go through it item by item.
Commissioner Takahashi?
Yeah, I would concur with that, just from the standpoint of, while on the surface it seems like there should be a straightforward formula associated with these potential fees, there are other circumstances that might have an influence that I think, again, it's that similar understanding all of the elements of a specific application that don't necessarily just fit nicely into these categories. And so from that perspective, I do see this one as taking some time to sort through.
So you're worried about the exceptions and taking a systems point of view that we might miss something?
Right, exactly.
Okay, got it. Okay. I was planning to go in the other direction of saying, as we're looking at this list, are there any things we should take off on phase 2? And that's another way to look at this exercise. So if there's any items that we should remove.
Can I ask one?
But go ahead.
One more question
ahead
about
on
possible phase 1.5. Item 45. Item 45. I was not crazy about the item, but it did. The notation that I had made on that item 45 was included objective standards for noise and air quality and emergency response time. Those are actually, this is reflected on the staff response. These are things which are often governed by external agencies. So, for instance, emergency response time is something the fire department makes a decision on independent of the city's action. So I don't know whether it's worth doing an examination there about clarifying the policy for when you have an external agency that's in charge. I believe, now, so that this doesn't apply so much for noise and air quality, I think, but for, for the fire department, the police department, I don't think you come into a case here where, for instance, there was a administrative approval, and then all of a sudden the fire department says, hey, wait a second, no, I'm not good with that. But that may be something that, just from a standpoint, that'd be something worth looking at. And again, I believe that that's very limited in scope, so that, perhaps that's a 1.5 thing. It obviously can be a 2 as well.
Commissioner Moore?
Okay, I don't think I am the author of this item. It doesn't seem very familiar. However, with regards to air quality, I was speaking to a planning commissioner from San Francisco, and they had done an air quality study in the city there, and there were certain zones which needed to have mitigation measures. And if we're going to continue to see the degradation of level of service on the I-280, it may be that we are interested in having an air quality study along that corridor and the 85, and it might be, like when we did public storage, that one unit was to have, the triple pane glass and the MERV 13 air filters, and it might be that we want to have an air quality study and then mitigation measures for a specific area along the freeway, like they're doing in other cities.
Yeah, they're also putting bike lanes there too, which would help.
It's kind of surprising.
Surprisingly.
As there's a bike lane which would not even have a wall, no protection, and it's in a noise corridor.
Oh, okay, interesting. Are you hanging? I just want to make sure.
I just wanted to raise that as a, there are standards here sometimes which are not city-driven standards, and it would be good as part of the objective review to have a statement about what,
What's under our jurisdiction,
yeah,
what's not.
what kind of process do you expect to happen there? But I mean, that can be phase 2 as well. So
Are you okay with 55 being phase 2? Miscellaneous?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, cool. So we'll make sure we're closing all the loops.
Yeah.
Okay. Is there anything else to talk about? Just want to make sure we're okay. Any other items anyone wants to jump on? So,
Okay, so it's my understanding that we were going to take items from phase 2, put certain items into 1.5, and then the remaining items we're going to prioritize. So some of these, which others might not see a great value in, would drop to the bottom of the priority list.
I don't think the intent was to prioritize tonight at all. I think the intent was to get the phase 1 and 1.5 to council right away, and then I didn't think we were going to prioritize anything in phase 2, but I believe that was the plan.
If I could clarify, I think the intent is not to rate them, right? So you can.
We have prioritized in buckets of 1, 1.5,
Exactly.
and 2.
Yes, that's the prioritization.
We're not
is
ranking
phase
them.
1.
We're not ranking
2.
them, so.
If you like, the commission could also say, for example, infrastructure is a topic to be prioritized within phase 2, as an example. But the intent is not to rate them individually.
Okay, so in light of that, I would prefer that we went from the top and just made a few statements about these items, since they are going to remain in the list, and there might be some that we actually do want to remove entirely.
Okay, so for the purpose of the minutes, to go through them, if there are any comments, just to note them, is that what you want to do, or? Okay, see what people have? All right. By bucket areas or by item numbers?
I would,
By the item.
yeah, line by line.
All right, item number 1, consider the vision statement, vibrant mixed-use heart of the city, correct inconsistencies in the maps of heart of the city, create objective standards to maintain the vision. Anything here?
Well, I have one issue. When you consider the vision statement for the general plan, I don't know if this is the appropriate time to be going over the vision statement when we're going to be having a general plan update coming. Is this something that we would want to tackle? Because I think it sort of changes the whole essence of the general plan. And would staff like to comment on that?
I will comment if you'd like me to comment. I think I don't disagree with your statement. I think the vision statement does go hand in hand with the general plan. So, pending the direction of general plan may or may not be shaped in the future, you want to be cautious how you implement or craft that vision statement. You don't want to be sort of leading in one direction or another, but it's entirely up to you.
And what I found kind of surprising about the vision statement is that they're talking about heart of the city and then removed Valco from heart of the city, which was the largest development. It was all kind of surprising, and it didn't seem actually consistent. And maybe that's the next line, correct inconsistencies in the maps of the heart of the city. There are some which extended down to Main Street within our general plan currently, so if it's not supposed to go to Main Street, which is what I'm hearing, then those need to be fixed.
Explicit. They need to be explicit.
But it seemed like we had addressed the issues around the heart of the city specific plan. There was a discussion previously about unifying the subsections together into, as part of that consistency discussion there. So I think that actually resolves that point about correcting consistencies in the map of heart of the city as it was probably intended. I mean, hard to say. And then again, in terms of the vision statement, if there's a non-objective part of the vision statement, then I think that's the scope of what we were talking about here. And if we're talking about, well, what do we want the vision statement to be,
Right.
independent, that's a different discussion.
Any other comments on 1? Number 2, PA3, define more pedestrian, bicycle, and transit facilities. I mean, I don't have any issues with that. Anybody have any questions? Commissioner Takahashi.
Yeah, I just lost kind of the scope of why we're going through each item now. Is it to, again, just to confirm whether or not it should be 1, 1.5, or 2?
I think we're done with going from
Okay.
1.
Right, just
Okay,
wanna
so
make sure.
so for the record, the halftime report, we've identified items that go to 1. We've identified items that have been pulled out from 2 to 1.5.
Right.
And we are now just looking at 2. The original thought process on my end was like, if there's things you want to delete, eliminate.
Okay.
Then we decided, do we want to rank or look at these? And then we got to that ranking conversation. But the point is not to rank these. But then we decided, hey, let's just comment on each one of these if there's something to comment against.
thank you.
I would prefer that, if we're all in agreement to something, I was trying to go exception based.
Right.
Which would have been easier. If there's
Yeah.
anything you want to delete, let's just
Yeah.
talk about what you want to delete. So, consulting attorney Petta.
Before we get too deeply into phase 2, I did want to raise again this issue that I don't believe the commission has yet addressed. On the bottom of page 2, this final paragraph regarding the consideration of adopting, turning previously adopted mitigation measures from, for instance, the general plan EIR into conditions of approval or
I
objective
think
standards.
we're coming to that as we go through this.
Great, okay,
Yeah.
excellent.
We're getting there.
Okay.
Thank you. And so, and I also want to make sure that we were between phase 1 and 1.5. There's nothing else we need from a public comment period. Is there anything we need to add? No. Jennifer, is there anything you want to add on 1.5? Yeah, please come up. We'll have you up. Not that you were ready, and since you're sitting, but so.
Between soccer and baseball games, I'm like, wow, who's winning? I guess I could, so my understanding is that this, I'm sorry, I pulled out this thing because there's a lot of pages. The items that are listed by number look familiar because I remember when this list was set up at some of the marathon meetings. So I understand you have pulled some of those items out to go to, and what does 1.5 mean? Is that like a higher criticalness or something?
So we all agreed on 1, which is the stuff that should go to council immediately for objective
Oh, okay.
standards.
And is
And then
1.5
we looked at items in 2 that should be in 1, and we called it 1.5, so that council can consider whether they should bring that into 1.
Oh, okay, so they have a higher 1 is the highest priority, 1.5 is the next higher priority, and then you have some orphans that are floating around in 2 land?
No, 2 just is second priority. We're just trying to figure out if we should keep that list.
So is that this list that goes from 1 to, what, 50 something? Oh, okay.
Yes.
So what are you all discussing right now?
What we're discussing at the moment is whether we keep what items. Okay, what we're discussing right now was what items in 2 went to 1.5. We finished that process, and now we're just discussing items in 2 with whether we should delete things, whether we should comment on them, and that's just kind of how we are. So.
And these are things that are in this final list here, the 1 to 50, that have not been promoted
to 1 or 1.5.
Well, okay. All right. Well, in that situation, I'm sorry if I sound a little vague here, but I know there was a section in here when they were talking about capacity on city services by increase of population. Now, I'm sorry, is that anything that got promoted to 1 or 1.5? What would you list that under? Is that under like critical city services, or how does increased population for our city affect city services and intersection load? What would that be under? Has that been promoted?
I don't think that was ever listed in here.
Okay, I saw something in here like city services. I saw something about sewers.
This one about sewers.
The one about sewer, yeah.
Actually, if I could comment, one of the other elements of this list is that the Phase 1 list was identified as things that could be acted upon, where staff can make a recommendation and can act on in a short time frame.
Okay.
So this isn't absolute. It's not absolute.
Okay.
well as
I'm
clarify
just going to
ambiguities.
speak to a minute right now because, something that I just read, actually, my mother pulled an article out for me in Santa Cruz today. Capitola Mall right now is owned by Merlin Gear, which owns San Antonio Shopping Center, and they are theoretically possibly looking at putting in 600 housing units in that mall, which is a new thing because Capitola has a small population and they have lots of open land like the mall. So one of the issues that had come up, and it made me think about this in the hour drive back from Santa Cruz, was that the city manager for Capitola, Mr. Jamie, I forgot what his last name is. He said, we're going to look at a potential 10% increase in Capitola by having 600 new housing units. We have to make sure that we have adequate city services, et cetera, that if we're putting in this increased housing at the mall, this is a new thing for them, that they make sure that their city grows with it, because the Capitola City Council and their staff are aware that they have a limited resource over there. That shopping center is used by the county, 6 adjacent. There is no other shopping center except in San Jose or in Monterey or Watsonville. So it made me think that Cupertino's sitting here with, 60,000 people. Because of things that are coming out of Sacramento, I would say socialist, but I won't go there, and the fact that we may have more housing at Velco, down the road, we may have more housing in other places. We need to start looking at how is that load affecting our city? The powers that be in Sacramento may not be aware or care of the impacts on our cities, but it's up to the cities to look to their resources rather than being, and this is the time, if you all are, I think this is future planning because of the load, the load that's coming from Sacramento is forcing the cities to do future planning, okay? If I, as a resident, have been coming to these meetings, this is my take on what objective planning is. It's future planning. So if we load Cupertino up to 50,000, 100,000 people, we have to look at the load impact on our sewers, our roads, our schools. Yes, my high school, Cupertino High School, where I live, is the direct hit target for Velco. It's also the direct hit target for the Fort Bay project in West San Jose. We don't, if housing goes in at El Paseo, those high schools around there may be the direct hit for, you could have 5,000 housing units at El Paseo. We don't know. That's another city, but it may impact, they may wind up going to Cupertino High School. We don't know. But this is the type of thing. So if we're doing future planning, I don't even know what that's called, I think that that needs to be promoted to a very, very high level. And if not, then it's something that needs to be included at a 1.5 or a 2, because I'm living in a part of the city that has park deficit. We have impacted load roads at a level D because of all the building, and we're going to be the direct target hit for Valco. And I mean, we're beyond gridlock. So I would like to see because I feel as a citizen helpless that there's been a socialist takeover of my city, and I think that our pushback on our future planning to keep democracy intact is to do aggressive future planning. And then when people start yelling at us that, oh, you have no housing, blah, 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 we can say, oh yes, you can put in 5,000, 10,000 housing units at, let's don't beat on Valco, at the Oaks. And we've done future planning, and we're saying that if you do that, we're going to be loaded. All of our roads are going to be at a level. So I would strongly suggest that be promoted to a level 1. Thank you.
Thank you. I do have a question to staff. And I don't know how cities do this in general. And if we actually do have scenario planning like that, where we do take in those big factors, like all at once in one big model. I don't think a computer model exists for that, right? Where we look at housing, water usage, density, power consumption, emergency services. Those scenario things don't exist right now, do they?
That's what the general plan is.
No, but it's not in a model. It's not in a model I can actually manipulate, change attributes.
Well, but that's what's being studied, right? There are scenarios of.
No, I understand that. But we don't have economic thing, what tax base we need, infrastructure. There's no model.
That is part of it.
I've never seen a model for that in a city. Like a financial model, like a cube I can actually work at.
Yeah, if you look at the last.
You and I know what I mean, but that's what I was thinking.
Chairman and other commissioners, I actually will have to leave early today because of some personal commitments.
Okay.
So I'm going to excuse myself from the rest of the meeting.
All right. Please note, Commissioner Saxena has left. Thank you.
Going back to your question, so the city presents to City Council the budget and where the tax basis and the funding for the city, but if you're talking about the environmental issues, that all went into the general plan environmental impact report, and then it was up to the City Council to decide if they were going to approve that environmental impact report, which had significant unavoidable impacts with mitigation, and they elected in 2014 to approve that report. So they essentially voted to accept significant unavoidable impacts that they could not fix.
Okay. Commissioner Takahashi.
Yeah, no, I was just going to say the same. It's in terms of impact on services, the environmental impact report covers most of those elements in terms of water and.
I'm looking for like a Sim City,
Right.
Minecraft model here.
You would have to look at that analysis and then create
the model.
Yes, because they hire consultants to assess all of those elements.
Right, because I don't know what
And then included things, a general plan update includes things like the financial outlook. There is a financial report. There is demands and requirements. Those things were all in the 2014.
I know, I read them, but they're all qualitative in like 7 different islands that don't connect with each other, where I can't model an impact against something. That's all. I'm just saying, it's not germane to this, but.
Right, it would be an incredibly complicated model, but.
I understand. That's why it's so hard to create an impact. I understand the impact of a decision is what I'm trying to say. All right, so back to what we were talking about earlier. Is there, on this priority 2 area, is there anything else anyone has any comments on, or do we want to go still line by line?
I think we had to shoot through.
All right, we're going line by line.
Yeah.
Okay, number 3, correct map on PA7 and boundary areas and define setback requirements. And
So there are many items here. Probably don't need to read them all.
I'm okay with these.
I would actually comment that that one item is separate from the rest. Address the move to electric heating and cooling is actually probably separate from the rest of the things here. And then just as an interesting point, just as a note, and then as an interesting point, most of the things in this point are actually things addressed by form-based code. So, you know, when you talk about things like, how do we describe buildings such that they have, you know, you talk about articulation of the face and things like this. These are the things intended to be addressed by form-based code.
I would just point out that normally when you apply a form-based code model like that, the question is, the variables are defined, but the problem is when someone applies another layer on top of those variables, the intent may have been lost, and I think that's really why some of the objections are to form-based code. So I'll just leave it that way. Commissioner, anyone? Takashi, more?
Well, actually, I would move a few of these items off of item 3. The roof policy defining requirements for a white roof, green roof, or solar, I think should be separate. So really the bottom 1, 2, 3, 4,
5.
bottom 4 items should,
This should be a separate
yeah, be
row.
separated.
Okay. Your 3.5 is your electric. 4, define gateway on bordering jurisdiction areas. Are 95-foot hotels acceptable on a city boundary adjacent to single 4-story properties? Any comments?
While I appreciate this item, I'm not sure that there's something we can do about it. The only thing I could kind of think of was, you know, are we going to adopt a policy so that we don't do to another city what San Jose did to us at the Stevens Creek and Stern Avenue intersection, where there's a Shell station on a very small lot, and they decided they would put in a 95-foot tall AC Marriott with 4 layers of underground parking, which would only provide 50% of the parking, and the rest of it would spill over unbundled onto the neighborhood streets. It wasn't a very neighborly thing for them to do, and is that, you know, do we want to adopt policy so that we aren't going to be doing the same?
Commissioner Funk, go ahead.
We have no jurisdiction over neighboring communities, so I would ask that we strike this item entirely.
I would actually take a different point of view. I'd say maybe we can create a delegation to have this conversation with the other cities on borders and what borders should look like.
Another example of this is actually where Cupertino approved the Hamptons, because that school district is actually not a Cupertino school district, right? And so the adding of up to 900 units and its impact on schools was not of concern because it really didn't impact Cupertino schools. So I'm just saying that, to your point, as a city, we've somewhat done the same thing. And so your recommendation of, hey, we're gonna take the high road and not do that, is probably worth really some level of discussion.
I think that the Hamptons is a drop in the bucket compared to what they did with the Stevens Creek Urban Village, going up to 150 feet, and then having the most ambiguous zoning where you could build pretty much whatever you wanted. You know, it might say residential, urban residential.
I'm not arguing scale of any kind here, as much as the point that the city of Cupertino has behaved in the same fashion from the standpoint of consideration of neighbors. Right?
Okay.
That's all I'm saying.
All I'm suggesting is let's have a delegation of friendship to the cities. That's really where I'm going here.
But that's always, I mean, you know, that's one of the things that happens is there is always discussion between the planning departments and the councils. I actually, you know, there's a, I don't know what the state is right now, but there's an application for the hotel on the Goodyear site, which is actually very close. It is a very tall building right on the gateway to Sunnyvale as well. So, you know, I don't think that this is something that's, we all recognize there's an issue. I don't think that there's anything that's going to improve the objectivity of.
Commissioner Moore.
So really, my take on this is whether or not we are going to continue to do what the neighboring cities have done to us. So if we don't agree with what was done with the Hamptons because it was impacting another city, does that mean we want to have a policy where we're in the bordering areas want to be scaling down our sizes or not?
I'm not sure that's within our jurisdiction to make that decision, but I think it would be interesting to add a comment here to set up, if there isn't an existing mechanism to set up that intercity cooperation around that. I think that's really what we're asking here, right? We're not asking to escalate or de-escalate. I think the question is, let's have a reasonable conversation on the borders. Good God, I don't want to go there. Next. Hey, I'm enough controversy. I don't want to get to borders now. Let's go somewhere else. Number 5, revisit, and no one has any humor in the city left. So revisit heart of the city specific plan. Number 5. So, anything else you guys want to add there? Number 6, heart of the city boundary should revert back to before December 4, 2014, and include the Valco site.
These items are contradictory. So we have one that says, you need to fix, within the general plan, you need to fix the heart of the city map, which I said extends down to Main Street, but it doesn't include Valco. And then this item is saying, well, let's go back to when heart of the city includes Valco. So we need to choose one or the other. But we can't have both of these items sitting here. They're contradictory.
Yeah. I think, so I marked a number of items that I would say we should remove. I would actually recommend we remove number 6.
I'm not sure I would move that far to do that. I'm trying to figure out if maybe the answer or solution here is get a clear definition of what the heart of the city boundary is, and not to be as prescriptive as if it's 2014 or not 2014. I think that's what it's kind of asking for here. Commissioner Moore?
Well, you could actually combine the two items and just, add the word "or."
I mean, I think the intent of the changes that have happened since actually before 2005, they reflect the fact that areas along that corridor were slated for different intensity of development. That's why they were subdivided, repeatedly, into a south, there used to only be north and south Valco. Then there was kind of Valco and Valco shopping area. And those were all done because the intention was to, that they were going to develop at different intensity. In some respects, that there is kind of capital heart of the city and then not capital heart of the city. And that's where some of that conflict comes from. So there was an earlier point here about clarifying and trying to bring greater consistency to the meaning of heart of the city. And I think that actually would resolve these issues.
Commissioner Moore?
Well, if you look at the way we've had development happen, particularly on the east side, with Main Street, Cupertino going in, and the Apple headquarters, you've got a locus of growth way on the east side, and then as you drive down Stevens Creek Boulevard towards De Anza, you have a lot of office and not a lot of retail, so there's not much connectivity until you get to the west side of Stevens Creek Boulevard past De Anza Boulevard. So I think, if we were to look at it all together, we would want to call the entire area heart of the city, rather than separating out, large areas like Valco, and then, and across the street from Valco, there's a nice property there, which could be integrated. But ideally, I understand there's politics involved, but conceptually, I would want the entire area to be called heart of the city.
Commissioner Fung, are you aware of, in terms of the initial definition of the areas, was it partly working around existing and available and or foreseen developments versus, right, in other words, the area that Commissioner Moore discussed, from Stevens Creek to Blaney, that kind of area is,
Wolf
it's
to Blaney.
well, yeah, Wolf. Well, your comment was you would like to see heart of the city defined pretty much from De Anza all the way across, right?
I think
On Stevens Creek.
I think you might actually start at Stelling and go all the way to.
Right. So my
all the way to
question
Stern.
was, because I'm not privy to how the specific areas, not that's a poor choice of words, but how the heart of the city areas were defined and what the criteria were at the time, and how much of it was based on what was there and what was available. So I just don't know, because it's always struck me that from the standpoint of how when you flow down Stevens Creek, it is very inconsistent, right? But the establishments that are there are pretty deep-rooted from the standpoint of, redevelopment of those areas is probably not in the cards for quite some time.
Yeah, well, I think if you go back a long way into the 80s, the intensity of development around the things that have a Valco name now, North Valco, South Valco, the Gateway, I believe that's anticipated. That was the intent from the start. The heart of the city was a little bit. The heart of the city is funny because it has the 4 or 5 areas which are largely reflective of the things that were there.
Right.
The Anza College existed. It was an area that has churches, and the old post office location. So that all of a sudden that magically becomes, for some reason, that's the pseudo governmental area. So I don't disagree. I think that there's consistency important, but I think that from a planning standpoint, there was clearly intent. There was a desire to have developmental intensity at the Valco Shopping Center and what is Main Street today. And that's just that follows the plan. I agree that I think having it unified is good. Having a unified model is good. If there's a way to talk about it, that's fine. But I think that it was. I don't think there was a intent for the for what is Main Street today to have the same intensity as the shopping center, and that's why those are separate. I believe those are separate areas.
Commissioner Moore. You're
Just an observation. It seems like there's been kind of a pull between the wish to have office along Stevens Creek and Stevens Creek Boulevard, and then retail or restaurant space. And I think ultimately some decisions were made at some point that created these dead zones, so that when we are in the future going to be adding these bike lanes down Stevens Creek Boulevard, and if you envision, maybe you think about some areas in Berkeley where you walk around and shop, and if you think about that and try to apply that along Stevens Creek Boulevard, I think we've got a long ways to go before we have that kind of vibrancy along the whole street.
I always imagined that was going to be more like a Champs-Élysées, where it was broad enough where you actually have 2 sets of paths on both ends. When I looked at the original plan and how big those setbacks are, you can actually have bike lanes, sidewalks separate, and then keep your parking. If you can even, there's not even parking on the freaking,
Right.
heart of the city. So you could actually have parking and, three lane highway, 3 lane thoroughfares as well. But I'm not sure what the original intent was. So I'm going to go back and study that.
I always assumed the heart of the city really was the city's attempt to create something resembling a downtown vibrant gathering area, which never really existed, and has always been kind of a goal, if you will, but a challenging one.
So, okay. Well, let's keep going since we're going to go down these lists. Anything else here on number 7? Special areas served by transit, north and south Dienza, but not covered by specific plan. Move to a unified land use model. Entitlement across the special area.
That's sort of the same thing again. Right now, Dianza is treated separately from Stevens Creek in terms of being more unified in thought. That would be great. That doesn't necessarily, but I think that doesn't necessarily mean that it affects how you think about the planning statement for that special area. It doesn't necessarily mean the area goes away or anything like that. I would just leave it.
I'm just leaving it. I don't have any comments here. Anyone want to move to 9? Separate non-residential land use designations to remove the commercial offices from mixed use except for specified clearly throughout mixed use areas. That is a tough wording.
This is similar to 9. I would delete this.
Similar. 9 is similar to what?
To 8. It is similar to that section of 8 that we removed.
Commissioner Moore? Commissioner Moore?
Well, I interpret this as having the opportunity to put in an office cap if you wanted to.
Why don't we just say that? It'd be a lot easier. I mean,
Well,
that thing is like.
This particular, I mean, the staff comment addresses this, that this would be basically creating a 100% residential section in areas which were intended as mixed use or commercial, previously. It's a change in plan. I mean, there can always be a change in plan, but I don't think it's clarification of anything.
Well, currently we have some of these non-residential land use designations, which, so if you have a commercial office residential land use designation, it would need to be over 50% non-residential. So it could alter that. In fact, that appears to be what it's addressing, separate non-residential land use designations and, make it just residential.
I think-
The benefit that you could get out of this is with regards to the housing bills, where we're looking at these mixed-use developments, and then they're saying, we can get to the 2/3 for that type of land use designation. So, I mean, it could assist with that.
You can ultimately build more housing that way.
It would cause you to build more housing.
It will
Yeah.
cause you to build more housing, which is what we're trying to do.
Yes.
In that designation. So.
Yeah, you're right.
Well, I don't know. We had an extensive discussion about P zones and what was going on with the P zones. So, there's a element there which really says, is there a hierarchy of what of the land use mix? That seems to me like that would be something to look at. And I believe that that's actually related to this. But I don't know. Again, I see this as a pretty wild change from the existing policy. And in that respect, I mean, if it's going to be a change, that's fine. It's not.
Well, it's not consistent with what's existing there, but I think there's a change of sentiment. So that's
Yeah, but
back to your point on
I mean, if there's a problem with objectivity, it's because there was a clear intent in the law, in the existing stuff, but somebody who's trying to overlay something that's different on top of that, that can be applied in many different ways. So,
I mean, 11 looks just like that too, doesn't it? Codify resident-facing commercial uses.
Yeah,
It kind of reads the same way when I was.
that one's different. I just wanted, I mean, that's one of mine. I don't know whether you want to go to that or.
I mean, is there? My intent wasn't to go through every one of these tonight, but
Yeah.
Since we're going down each one, I mean, 10 is very different, but 9 and 11 looked similar to me. Like,
Yeah.
in terms of
10,
intent.
10 is not, it's not clear to me. I believe that what was probably intended by 10 was that there are certain areas like South Valco and Valco where there were height limits, and then there were height limits when community benefits were present, and people seem to have a hard time with that. I don't know, I mean, I don't think that's, I would drop 10 as well. This is part of the prerogative of the council is to identify, in negotiating a development agreement, to identify things that are beneficial to the city. Those are community benefits, and to do that.
Commissioner Moore or Commissioner Takahashi?
So I think that I'd like to see the survey that was done for the general plan amendment back in 2014 and hear the community input regarding the benefits which were added into the projects. And I don't think that there was, wholesale approval of adding community benefits. And I know that, during the specific plan process, the community benefits which were added into a very large project caused some issue. So there are people who do not like that community benefits were added into the evaluation process for certain projects. So perhaps that does need to be revisited.
Slippery slope.
Commissioner Takahashi?
No, but this is the
Right.
nature of, there's a nature of, if
Right.
somebody
It's
would like
the
to develop
quest-
more
I think the
intensely.
question becomes then,
Yeah.
so there's a negotiations and there's some leverage, right, associated with approving a project. And the theory being, hey, we want to get something for the community to approve this project. Essentially is the, I think where it gets a little bit slippery, if you will, is who's determining what those benefits are? Who are they benefiting? Right?
Well, who's negotiating?
Right. Generally, yes. Who's negotiating? And so I think the general term community benefits is very broad, and the implication is it's something that benefits the community. The community is the broader community. However, then when the specifics of what those are negotiated, you're going to have people that agree that's a community benefit and people that disagree that that's a community benefit. And that's, I think, always going to be the case unless you're talking about a very large park that everybody can access. So removing the ability of the council to gain something for the community, I don't think is necessarily the intent. I think where it becomes, how can the city council be transparent in terms of getting a benefit that the general community is behind and sees and accepts as, hey, that was a good thing that we secured associated with this development. That's so. Anyway.
I want to add to that point
Sure.
and see if we're in the same spirit here. I agree with what you said, and I want to add one thing. So when we get to a point where the city council no longer has jurisdiction on a project to negotiate a developer agreement, how do you retain that local control and write that as an objective standard that community benefits can only be approved by city council and cannot be approved by ministerial approval? That is really the heart of the matter of taking back local control, right? So you want to negotiate, but is the city manager tied on being able to negotiate community benefits and only council can approve them? I mean, I think that's kind of what the heart of this question may be about.
Right. In large projects, the council tends to be very integrally
Engaged.
involved in what those benefits are.
But if you're taken away and it's ministerial approval only in a really large, hypothetical large project, they may lose that ability to negotiate, and that's the concern.
But I think that there's actually a term, the phrase that's being used here, community benefits, actually refers to things that are being offered voluntarily
Right.
for a discretionary approval. All those things, there is no opportunity to offer community benefits on a ministerial approval.
Right.
You're just following the
The process.
objective standards, so.
There are still levers and incentives, though, that might not be called community benefits at that point, is what you're saying.
I think that the interesting one, the example would be the office buildings on Main Street had a requirement, to gain additional height, they need to have retail, and that was,
And senior housing or something like that, too.
not, I mean, I don't think that was actually tied in on that one, but so those sorts of things, if you happen to write something like that into the code, that was the intention in the last general plan. There was an intention to have a section that talked specifically about this community benefit earns you this bonus, and they never executed that. So I think that you're probably in the spot where they, where you want it to be. I think that right now, the things that we talk about as community benefits, they really are voluntary and outside of the, they're part of the discretionary process, outside of the formal requirements, the objective requirements.
Commissioner Moore, you're saying?
Well, this is neither here nor there, but the Valco-specific plan, the bill for it is around $3.9 million. And to my knowledge, the negotiations occurred between staff and the developer for that development agreement, which had the community benefits in it. I have not heard from any council member that they negotiated that deal.
Oh.
So can someone please contradict me and tell me that city council sat down with the Valco developer and hammered out that development agreement?
I believe none of that city staff are here.
Yeah, just more along the lines of certain city council members claiming to be involved and negotiating on behalf of the city. That's all.
Are they any longer?
No, not a current city council.
Okay, and we've also lost the previous city manager, assistant manager, head of planning, another deputy manager, and a few others from that era as well.
I think, I mean, the intent on this conversation here is really how do we ensure that there's transparency in that process? How do we ensure that we have the appropriate leverage when a good proposal comes in place, and that it doesn't get sidestepped somewhere even if it was not minister approved, if the city council was to make that approval. But I think we can discuss all that later. I think the intent here was really, does this belong in phase 2? And I think, does anybody have any objections behind that? If not, let's move on.
So I can just blurt this out. I think that, when it comes to negotiating the development agreement, that would normally be in the city manager's territory or the director of community development. That is done in conjunction with the council. They clearly, it was very clear in this case that the council was collecting input from the council on the things that they wanted to see in community benefits. You see that as well with things like the Kimco Hotel. So,
I have reason to believe that this is codified somewhere. I believe I've read how these development agreements are supposed to happen. And I don't believe it is supposed to have the city council involved. So I'd like city staff to talk about that, how a development agreement is supposed to come about.
I will have to look at the code and get that specific language. My understanding is that a city manager is typically heavily involved in that discussion. However, in the case of a project that goes through the general plan amendment process, the gatekeeper process, of course, you've seen it in a public setting where the council would get involved at that level, making recommendations on certain agreements, if you will.
just to be sure, the city manager always has the right to seek input from the council members along the process, as long as they're not, sharing here's what the other people thought.
Oh.
Correct?
I'm not a city manager. I'm not at liberty to speak on that.
From my understanding, that is correct, Commissioner Fung. But the problem is that means that the city manager makes the at that point the city manager makes the final approval on that, as opposed to the city council approving
The
it.
city manager sets the tone of how that agreement is struck. The city council always has a choice to take it or not take
Right.
it.
Correct. They do have the final approval.
Right, and any city manager that's going to negotiate in a vacuum and come back and say, hey, this is what I got.
Might not be
it's
around.
It's not in line with what the city council wants. That's
Not a
Okay.
career. It's a career limiting move.
yes, career limiting move, exactly.
All right. Can we move to 11?
Yeah, I just wanted we touched on this very briefly in the last discussion. I just want to touch on one more time. I think that there's a substantive difference between
Yeah.
businesses that serve the community and businesses which are outwardly focused outside the community. So a corporate office, for instance, a
Doesn't
corporate office
necessarily serve a
doesn't necessarily serve the people in the community. So the only comment I would have here is that right now, you can get we have a commercial space approval, which would let you have an office. Well, I don't want to say it. It is difficult to specify. I believe it is difficult to specify. I would like to have resident-facing businesses in this area, but not a externally focused office, corporate office. And that would actually be, I think that would be an addition that would be valuable.
Actually, I like that interesting conversation, whether it's serving the community directly and also serving commercial interests that are outside the city. The other one would also be, is it taxable versus not taxable revenue,
Yes,
too?
absolutely.
I think those are probably two designations we might even consider as we update the plan.
I think actually taxable is already, is part of the consideration already, because there are a whole bunch of things in, like, Heart of the City, for instance, has things where you can't remove sales tax generating businesses. They need to, they're given priority in the location. But I think that the idea, one of the discussion points that I saw related to Valco, for instance, there was commonly an interest in businesses that would serve the community, but maybe not in a extension of corporate office. And it would be great if there were a way to say that. That was my only thing here. That may actually be something that exists today, but I don't actually see it anywhere in the code.
Commissioner Moore?
Okay, so you are adding in medical offices, which would serve the local community, and then we might have an issue with tutoring centers and how they are taxed, and gyms, if we would want to get into the area of taxing gym memberships, which aren't currently.
Yeah. No, I mean, the tutoring centers don't generate any tax revenue for anyone, right? I mean, they should be taxed.
Yeah, historically,
kind of-
this was one of the challenges along Stevens Creek and De Anza was during the time, there was a time when many retail stores were closing, and there were a lot of requests to replace it with martial arts schools and tutoring centers, which don't generate sales tax. So there was a very, very strong push. I don't even know what we call this thing across the street from us, but there was a very strong push to not allow non-sales tax generating businesses there, which led to that building being empty for a long time.
It was, yes.
So,
Okay. All right. 12, your citywide major allocation table, eliminate that. Any comments on that?
I still like it, but leave it in phase 2. I know that it'll be, the 54th-ish thing to be discussed.
That is with good intention. Number 13, require that all housing units, not only SFH, define size by square feet, not only number of units. Anything on 13? I think this probably overflows to the next page. Nope, it doesn't. Okay. I have no comments on that.
This is unusual. Yeah.
Well, one of the questions was whether or not, if you had a multi-unit project, if you were going to say or specify that, 1,250 square feet per unit. Otherwise, if you had, 300 units, you could end up with any number of different size projects in the end if they had really large units or really small ones, and you can't really judge based on the number of units. And this was a request to have this added on to get some specificity about how the final size of a project would be. And
Yeah, no, I think it's important to understand how big ELI, VLI, what each unit's going to look like, if it's 100 or if it's, if you're the right number and the right size of unit combinations.
Okay, well, when we did the specific plan for Valco, they used number 1250 average, but it was just a guesstimate. You had no idea what
Yeah.
you would end up with ultimately.
So I would actually comment that a common problem with the current criteria for allocation for building is using something like density, dwelling units per acre is a poor way to do this because you could, obviously it creates an incentive to build very, very big houses, if you're profit up by the built foot. Right. So I think that the idea of not using density as a determination factor, and again, this kind of comes back to the form-based code thing again.
I was waiting for that.
Yeah. That would be an improvement. That would be an improvement to the way that we do planning here. And I think that's what this is actually kind of saying as well.
Okay. I'm fine leaving it there for now. I mean, I don't think anyone else here is in a disagreement. Is that correct? Okay. Don't require parcel consolidation, number 14.
This was one of mine. My only comment on this was I generally agree with regard to residential planning. I just think that for kind of large area construction, that this was burdensome.
Commissioner Moore, go ahead.
Well, what I believe we saw with the Valco specific plan was that we say in the general plan that we want to consolidate the parcels there. But then when you looked at the actual agreements, that it looked like they were allowed to sell off the BMR areas and then basically break the whole thing back up into little pieces and sell it off that way. And they went so far as to say like the entire east side could be a single employer, and that they could block off the streets for that area and really divide the whole project up into small pieces.
And so I just say, people are concerned about the size of a Valco redevelopment and the intensity of it. And part of the cause for that is that there was a clause in the general plan with regard to the Valco shopping district that the goal was to have it happen under a single master developer, to consolidate all the lots together so that it all got redeveloped rather than being done piecewise. And that actually, I think, contributed to it being being a very big, high-stakes thing. So, this is a very unique, I think it's a unique situation for only a couple spots in town. That parcel consolidation is good from a planning standpoint, but that it does carry with that, it has the effect of creating, something that becomes a multi-billion-dollar project.
Commissioner Moore.
Wouldn't you say that the developer was responsible for creating that scenario? That the developer asked for these things, asked to have that put into the general plan, and created that high-stakes environment that you're talking about?
No, I definitely wouldn't.
No.
They didn't want that.
The city's always pushed for
Yeah.
lot consolidation to allow for the most flexible use of, as opposed to many, like five, for example, 5 lots that are developed independently. Just in general, from a planning standpoint, the city's target has been, if lot consolidation were possible, it would make for a more unified development.
So you're suggesting perhaps that the purchase of Sears and J.C. Penney was maybe directed by the city towards the developer to do that? And that the Sears could still be there with the Bay Club open right now, had the city not
No,
pushed for that?
Sears is going bankrupt regardless of the situation.
Right, but
no, I'm just saying that I'm not necessarily specific to Valco as much as the general mindset of, if lot consolidation can happen, it allows for more flexible development. That's all I'm saying.
And I think in this particular case, that was actually something that's just driven by a number of the economic reports that had said the barrier to Valco redevelopment.
Right, the fact that you had five different owners, and there's no way that anything is ever going to get done because you have 5 different owners.
That's something that predates
Right.
the current owners by 10 years. So I don't think that they would have wanted to buy the whole thing if they could have not done it. It's just from a practical standpoint, if you wanted that site to get redeveloped, and you want it to all get redeveloped, not just be, here's this new section and then this old Sears across the street, that was put on as a requirement.
Okay, but at the end of the day, with their specific plan, it was written in such a way, it was crafted in such a way that they could divide off the east side property and make that an office park for potentially one of our largest employers in the city. And then the west side would then take all the 2,668
Right, I'm not referring
units.
to the end outcome of how things ended up as much as just what's written here, which is the recommendation of lot consolidation. That's all I'm talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
I'm fine with leaving it there, guys. I would move on. But my one comment here is really, given the high cost of where we are with land today and how things are being developed, I'm not sure how prescriptive we want to be with parcel consolidation or not. And then I think that's kind of an interesting scenario, because I think some market forces would come into play as to, one, if only big money could come in to develop something, you have those challenges versus consistency across parcels, in terms of a master plan. But those can be resolved with governance agreements. But I want to move
It's
on.
it's not even clear that, you gain consistency across the two sides of Wolf Road. It's not clear that that's necessarily desirable. So,
Don't know. I mean, I think the original intent, if I went back and I asked a few folks about why this was done this way, it was because they were expecting a revitalized, same retail district with one developer. It would have been like a mega mall, like a Valley Fair. I think that was the original intent, and as opposed to what we have today, that's no longer a retail district. So, okay, 15. I wonder who wrote that. Adopt form-based code standards for all specific planning areas. Traditional standards, height, far, or setback. So,
I would just,
just leave it there.
if it's okay with,
Commissioner Moore, go ahead.
I think we've already talked about form-based code in earlier this evening, and I would like to have this item struck.
Commissioner Takahashi.
I don't necessarily agree. I'm not saying I agree with form-based code as much as I think it is something that the city should just assess from the standpoint of how it would, because we're in a situation where there's, from the standpoint of developable land that's left, it's not a large space. It's pockets, it's on a case-by-case basis, but there's still a desire to some extent for some mixed use. What those mixes are is definitely an area of contention. But I'd like to just be more open-minded with regard to consideration versus saying no to something. I'm not saying yes, but I don't want to say no.
Commissioner Takahashi, if we have only a few parcels left or plots left for development, it's not like we've got like lots of land where we need to do rapid development on a form-based code basis, right? That kind of contradicts your argument on that piece, I would say. But keeping your mind open is a different conversation point. So that's all I'm saying.
So I would actually comment again. I think that you're misinterpreting what form-based code means. The way that Monte Vista looks, there are standards that apply in Monte Vista that are different than there are around in town. The same thing with the Eichler district.
Fairgrove.
Yeah, those are again examples of form-based code. So it's a matter of, there's a flavor. There's something we define. There's a flavor. It isn't necessarily an urban. In fact, it's not in a lot of places. The most common place to see form-based code application is when people are revitalizing downtowns.
Right.
And non-urban. In fact, they're trying to preserve a non-urban flavor there while growing. So, I think that there's something overloaded here that it's being associated with something that it's not.
Okay. Any comments here?
Yeah, in the end, the city council is going to.
They're going to decide. 16, standards that vary by project scale. Small and large projects have intrinsically different requirements. Anything you want to add here?
Yeah, this is one of mine again. I would just say that we run into a number of problems here because our code anticipates a single-family home well. It anticipates a small apartment building. It has a hard time with a large apartment building. So I would just encourage the city to be mindful of that and to perhaps consider developing things that describe, it's not so much the thousands of apartment kind of project as it is what happens when you're talking about 50 or 100.
I'm just I'm digesting it. So. Is yours reconsider the design review process? Is that yours as well?
Yeah.
Okay.
This is just a matter of bringing forward as many things as possible, whether you're talking about somebody doing remodeling on their home or, a major redevelopment, there often are, in particular, I think one of the ones that often comes up is that the architectural review comes late in the game and may entail more changes than expected. It's just the serial nature of approval. If you do what you can to make that more visible up front, then that will benefit everybody.
Yeah, saves time on redesign, fees, everything else.
Yeah, just a question to staff. I assume that there's at least some of that happens to applicants before they bring their design to the city for approval in terms of look and feel and.
Yeah, the city offers a free of charge preliminary design review process. So, and applicants are encouraged to go through that process. In that review process, we coordinate with fire, with building division, public works, other agencies, in providing a comprehensive common list letter to the applicant before they submit. So this includes design as well.
Right. So the difference then would be the city actually providing information first as opposed to providing feedback on an initial assessment. Okay.
Yeah, I think it's good clarification. 18, define buffers with dimensions and type. If boundary walls defines minimum height setbacks. I don't know where that came from.
It wasn't clear exactly what this one was saying to me. About the boundary wall.
Yeah, I agree.
I mean, I think currently setback, slope setback, those things define these buffers. So I think this is redundant.
I'm trying to figure out why the tie back to park areas. I think that there's something related to that.
I'm going to guess that this word buffers is in the general plan. So it might be that there's some
Land
reference
buffer,
to
water buffer, that kind of thing.
some sort of buffer between residential areas and commercial areas. They might be using that word, and it probably is a request to have this, further explained. Kind of like the line of maintaining the building bulk below the one-to-one line. I have a feeling that you're looking at the same definition issue.
Okay. We did 19 and 20.
Can I ask a quick clarification? 19 and 20, was it decided, I hate to bring back old items, but was it decided they both go to 1.5? Right,
I believe that was correct.
That's what I meant. Thank you.
You trying to extend the meeting?
I am not. Thank you.
Just kidding. 21, require the city to post on the website what the RENA numbers are, how many apps have been approved. Anyone have any problems with that?
I think that might be mine, and I think it's a great idea.
I think that.
Should we take a bio break in general? Okay.
I think on this one, the staff response was that these things are in fact on the website, so this is deletable.
Okay. I'm going to take a bio break here. We've seen the commissioner leave, and we've been going on for quite some time. Apologies for not doing one. Do a bio break. Please come back at 8:55. All right, welcome back. So we are on housing 19 through 26. Is there anything we want to do here? Can I go exception-based with everyone? Is it?
Well, if we're going to do exceptions, I mean, that's okay with me. So, you know,
Your mic, sorry.
as we were saying with 21, I think that that's already happening, so not necessary. And on 22, I think that one's problematic just because the timing is actually impossible for no other reason.
It's a party homes lawsuit designation problem. I think that's part of the issue if you look at the case law for that. But there needs to be some kind of policy as to what designation is forfeited, and I'm not sure what that timing is. So.
I think the problem is that if you grant a entitlement for 2 years, I mean, you can see the hotel that we most recently looked at was more than 2 years in process, and that has no controversy. So I think it would need to be a longer period of time, and I think the way that that's done today is that when a approval is granted, that comes with a amount of time. If it's a development agreement, there's an amount of time. If it's
I think we cut it, right? We cut it from 10 years to 5 years on the development agreements. So.
it's just,
And 5 is, some developers think that's too quick, but for what we're trying to accomplish.
So I would comment. I think that 2 years is not 2 years is not doable.
Well, this really isn't about the approvals. This is about whether or not a site is designated as a housing element site, and then removing it if they've made no effort to produce a plan for it.
But then
With the defined effort.
then you have a HCD problem because they approved housing in these locations, the entitlement in these locations. So you really can't put a time limit on that. You can just, in the next housing element, you can say, hey, I've decided to move it, or,
Revoke it.
yeah.
Okay, so it's more of a legislative issue that actually could or maybe should be more appropriately be given to somebody like Senator Scott Wiener if you're really serious about getting housing, and we have these sites sitting here not getting built, then, create some legislation and do something about it.
I'm sure he will.
Well, the intent here, of course, would be that you entitle sufficient places that you can achieve your housing goal or arena goal or whatever, without having to have a lot of thrash on it. If you are intentionally trying to limit the number of places you can build, and then depending on people to build quickly, that's where you run into this problem.
Any other comments on here?
I just think I think this is addressed by the way that when the project is approved, that's probably addressing it in terms of the amount of time you have before you have to get to the building permit.
Are we just going through line items right now to just go over line items and discuss them, or are we going through line items with the purpose of deleting or amending them? That's what I want to make sure.
I think we want to delete and amend
Delete and
some of
amend?
these. Yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
And then 23, I think what this person is probably talking, on this one, I would just comment that the staff response is actually, I think, answering a different question. The person who was asking the question was trying to eliminate the alternative of in lieu fees.
Yeah. We got that.
And the staff response is actually saying that, in lieu fees are not charged when the actual qualification, when the thing is qualified. So that's just a clarification.
I agree with that clarification, that if the need isn't met in a certain area, don't allow the developer to be excused from providing it. So if it is parkland, for instance, that you can't do an in lieu of fee.
So I think the modification here is to revise the staff comments.
Well, I don't know. I mean, this is a tough one, right? Because a lot of times the parkland is an example of one where I believe the in lieu fee is effectively almost a requirement from the state law. So, you can have limits on where you can and cannot do that. I think this is kind of saying, there are many places where you see that there is a clear choice that the council has in terms of affordable housing, for instance. You can charge an in lieu fee or just for round off and things like that, in lieu fee or actually cause the units to be built. I think that this is intending to say that it wants to try to have the actual construction happen. I would just say that that's always going to be limited by state law. So, I don't really have a problem other than to say, that may not always, you can't say, I don't want to allow an in lieu fee for school impact, because that always will be, that's against state law. There's nothing that you can do to force somebody to build a school.
Well, you could just add the word where applicable. If you're, talking about the school impact fee, that would be something different. But I think that, going back to the parkland, we want to have that provided for, and not have in lieu of fees instead.
I think what you're asking for here is really the option to eliminate in lieu of fees. Is that more clear? So giving people the option to do that, or to eliminate them completely, is what you're saying is?
Right. If you're discussing a park deficient area, which you've already identified, then that developer needs to provide the parkland space and not be able to buy their way out of it. And that gets into the question that we've pushed on to City Council. Well, if you're in a park deficient area, are you going to allow a recreational area like a gym and pool and courts and that type of thing be built in, and have that recreation area then count as parkland? And that's for them to decide.
So I think that means that they're in effect, the council has wide latitude on what they can accept, as an alternative to actually producing the whatever. So I don't think this is really adding anything. But my main comment, if it sits in here, I don't think it matters very much. My main comment here was just that the issue around the staff comment being out of sync.
Commissioner Moore.
Where it does matter is if you've got some kind of state new housing law that is, you're getting a streamlined ministerial approval, and they're looking at the parkland requirement, and that's where this becomes important. Otherwise, yes, we do want City Council to be weighing in on whether or not they're going to accept these alternative recreational areas.
I think as a policy matter, the challenge we have at this moment is how we respond to ministerial review and what we codify in objective standards. That's really the challenge. And in some cases here, some of these requirements across the board in phase 2 are too specific to really be a policy because it does handicap folks. In other cases, they're too broad in which that they could be misinterpreted in a ministerial review. And I think the challenge here that we face as a planning commission is finding the right balance between those two. And that's what's going on here in these discussions. And so long we're cognizant of that, we don't go too far one way and being too specific and too far the other way of allowing ministerial review to take over something that matters to the values of this community. I think we'll get to the right balance.
Yeah, again, generally, if there's a choice between one or the other, then that's something that's only going to happen in discretionary review. So,
And that is the concern, yeah.
yeah, well,
And
if it's discretionary review, then that's not an issue, an objective issue. I don't know, the Parkland one is a good example of one where, the way the Quimby Act is written, there are going to be ways where you can
get around it.
where you don't have to dedicate the park if the park, the certain characteristics about how the space is available. That's state law. That it doesn't matter what you put locally. That will override.
So here we are on 23. Any other comments on 23? Okay. Sounds like 24, consider a BMR citywide dispersal requirement. define dispersal both within a BMR project?
Again, this looks like it's addressing, if you're looking at a streamlined ministerial approval, ordinarily, I think this, the dispersal requirement would go to city council to make a determination on. So I think it's actually going to be difficult to define dispersal if this item does come to city council for consideration.
Yeah, and I would just say that the staff comment here, germane, there are, putting a dispersal requirement would be viewed, can easily be viewed as something that would be restricting housing production.
Are we doing a BMR workshop at some point? So,
How the Housing Commission will.
Housing Commission will, okay. Provide for senior retirement living for active seniors wanting proximity to shopping, dining, and entertainment areas. It's an existing work program for housing strategies. All right. Market rate ADUs should not count as moderate BMR production. Today, all ADUs would be counted towards the city's moderate RENA production, even though many have no BMR obligations or restrictions. That is an oversight that should be fixed. So I don't
There's a
think.
path for that, so not an issue.
All right, moving to mobility, and not your phones. Level of service as threshold of significance in CEQA EIR process. So
I think we should remove this one. This, again, staff comment has captured this one. The state has a law that says that's not going to be that's not a determining factor. It can be included in a LOS review can be included, but you can write a law and it's not going to apply.
I attended that workshop, but Commissioner Moore, go ahead.
So what does this mean? It could be used outside of the CEQA process during project review. How would that exist outside of the CEQA process?
I think what that's referring to is the official CEQA determination, but rather than using it as sort of a secondary evaluation tool, but not the official CEQA determination.
Okay, so right now, you could have an EIR and the traffic study could have level of service plus VMT. And I think we've seen some of these studies which show both. So essentially, we can still have it exactly like that, and where staff is directed to ask for both level of service and VMT. Okay.
Part of the reason that, I mean, from that workshop we all attended on VMT and LOS, I mean, it doesn't mean we can't use LOS. It just means the state doesn't recognize it, right? Is that correct? And the trend is to move away from LOS because people want to do densification using VMT as the calculation when actually you truly have an impact on LOS. And that's really, they're trying to use one metric to cover up the other metric, but the actual level of service has declined. Oh, but we covered more vehicle miles traveled, and that's really what it is. But we can still use LS for our own internal usage. Is that correct? I just want to make sure.
Well, actually, though, I think you can look at it, but it's not that's not cause for rejecting an application.
I believe the distinction is that it's no longer the threshold of significance for the transportation analysis under CEQA, but it can be a standard included in general plan, which is analyzed as part of the local plan consistency part of CEQA analysis.
Okay. I kind of want to eliminate that, but that's just me. So
we should. I mean, I think that one should get dropped.
No, the VMT portion, sorry. Not that. I have to be more clear. So, but anyways. Okay. Bicycle level of service. Why not bicycle VMT? Just kidding. Bicycle level of service. So what is that?
Yeah.
They actually calculate the level of service for bicycle riders. So you could end up with a situation if okay. You could end up with a situation where you have made the bike lanes too narrow on Stevens Creek Boulevard. You actually have people who are truly interested in using them, and then you can only have one rider wide in that area. You've created a barrier with the concrete curb, which they're planning, and the bollards, and then so you've got one person who's going very slowly, and then they're basically blocking everybody up behind them. It's a thing.
Right, but is it best served as an LOS function versus just general guidelines associated with bike lanes and protected bike lanes? In other words, the width of the bike lane is generally determined or specified such that there's an element of safety associated with riding a bike in that bike lane and the velocity of traffic that's adjacent to that bike lane. When there is a barrier, it kind of allows some level of more flexibility because you're saying now there's a physical barrier between the car traffic and the bicycle. So it seems to me it's more of a not necessarily a level of service element as much as because it's as much as a safety issue that you want to address generally speaking in bike lanes. If it impacts areas where you think the bike traffic would actually be more significant, I could see where you might then have some level of accommodation for the width of a bike lane associated with high traffic cycling areas.
Hopefully they've addressed this in their design looking
Right.
at Stevens Creek Boulevard because, also considering traffic going westbound to De Anza College, that could become a problem if they are making that lane too narrow for the bicycles. So this seems to me like it's an engineering question for Dave
Right.
Stillman, the
Yep.
transportation engineer,
Exactly.
that's where this
Right.
should be going.
Yep. And the
Yeah.
Bike Ped
And the
Commission.
Bike Ped Commission. Yeah, the Bike Ped. All right, 29, potential autonomous vehicle requirements for a future city fleet concept.
Okay, so I think this is an awesome idea. I came up with it, and it's too far in the future, so I would strike it. But the idea is that you would have potentially an autonomous vehicle fleet that could be parked at various locations throughout the city so that people could call upon those vehicles and use them, and that they wouldn't be located too far from their home. And then they would, relocate to another place afterwards. But, you consider how much the shuttle system cost versus, we compared this to taking Ubers, for maybe $6 a shared Uber trip. Or down the road, buying a fleet of electric vehicles for the city and testing out that model. So I would suggest that that we strike this off, but consider that this could be where we're moving.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is it's definitely not clear if it's going to be a public element or a private element that provides that.
Is everyone okay with striking, or do you want to leave it just for discussion?
I'm okay.
I think we should strike, just because developing
We're
standards
striking
are,
it. All right, we're gonna
there's a
strike it.
lot of unknowns.
Okay. 30, same comment, VMT LOS. I think we've said everything we said about that. Adopt Vision Zero standards to help identify best practices around non-auto mobility. I'm just going to make a comment that might get me killed one day, but I'm just going to say it. I think we need expiration dates on different types of transportation modes and pathways. If the things aren't being used, they need to be removed and tried somewhere else. But we don't have any standards for that, so we keep putting in and taking away lanes that are much needed for cars, and that's probably going to get me killed for saying that, but I'm just saying that at some point, each one of these, if cars aren't being used, those lanes should be removed and put to bikes. If bikes aren't being removed, e-scooters, same thing. I mean, but we need some expiration dates on some of these modes because we don't have enough lanes for everything that we're trying to put up.
This was my point. I think that I don't disagree. You want to always be looking at finding appropriate utilization of the resources you have. I think that trying to look at Vision Zero, this is more affects the city more than it affects the the applicants or the people who would be building here. That's a good way to understand, for right now, what are the better ways to be using the space.
Okay. 32, adopt objective standards that projects must implement the mitigation measures already identified in a certain list. Partial list of mitigation measures.
Well,
Anyone have anything here?
for 32, 33, and 34, I would ask that we remove them. These are direct reference to the Valco specific plan. That's a dead letter now, so
I think we
those
should.
mitigations don't matter.
I think we should remove those as well.
I agree. Let's take those off.
I
So
agree.
32, 33,
34.
Okay.
And I believe that addresses the issue, the paragraph from most of it, about adopting mitigations. That was that.
Most of
paragraph
it, you
from
could still discuss whether you want to adopt mitigations in the general plan EIR, but that,
Oh,
and I
okay,
think that's
yeah.
addressed later on. in
Okay,
this,
yeah.
yeah.
We do that later. Yeah. That's later on. Okay. Making 35, adopt a decarbonization policy. Objective standards for reduction of greenhouse gas through electrification in the building code. It's on the work program. Nothing else to add here. Sequestration policy. Objective standard for city private planting and landscape should be established that encourage plant-specific species that remove CO2 and particulates from the air. No comments on that. Adopt parking lot shading standard. Objective standards that aim for mature tree coverage of some percentage of the grade level footprint of parking lot structures to reduce heat island effect. In Mountain View, this is 40%. I'm mixed with that one. I'm just saying, I want solar panels where the shading is to capture the light, but then it's just going to get hotter, so it's kind of interesting. 38, find language that will protect solar rights in a variety of situations. Anyone know what that's about?
I have a hunch this is about one of the housing bills. And what we were looking at was that you could have a 4-story building come into a residential neighborhood, and if you have a neighbor who is doing urban farming, then you are now going to be shading their property.
Or if they have solar panels.
Or that, correct.
Oh, the angle the solar panels would block out. Okay, got it.
So with regard to solar policy, I don't have a problem with looking at it. I think that almost universally around the city, that will have the effect of trees. It actually impacts trees, not homes. So this almost certainly will not have the effect that somebody was looking for here. And I also would say that if you happen to live next door to a site that could build a tall building, this is just like many problems we see around privacy. That's the way it is. So, I think it's probably good to look at. But if it, if the effect, I think the most common effect of those laws will generally be the trees have to get cut.
I'm always concerned with our tree policy. On one hand, we're out of water. On the other hand, we keep planting trees. It's just kind of weird. So, and then if you need solar, the trees get in the way of your solar, and it's kind of and then we need more water. It's kind of this vicious cycle. So, all right, adopt. Find language to use we did that one. Solar access policy. Same thing. Shadow policy. Same thing.
Actually, no. Berkeley has a very well-written shadow policy. Some of the shadow policies that I've seen submitted will use a specific time of day, say 4 o'clock in the afternoon, regardless of what time of year it is, whereas Berkeley will say you'll draw the shadow line at 2 hours before sunset and 2 hours after sunrise. It might be 3 hours. But at any rate, it's based on sunrise and sunset rather than, 4 o'clock in the afternoon, where you're going to have the sun much higher in the summertime at that hour than, in the wintertime. So that's why you point at Berkeley's, and it also, if you're having planting up on a roof, they would address that as well and show the whole shadow coming down. So that's why that's there. And as far as I know, we don't have a shadow policy here at all. And that was something, when I was looking at the hills at Valco a couple of years ago, that I wasn't seeing proper shadow lines, and it was concerning because they were showing the openings in the roof in that plan, and you had trees over it, and they were making it look as though it would be very sunny in the open areas below the green roof, and it really didn't seem like in practice, when they actually would finally have this built, that was going to happen.
Oh, yeah, there would be no sunlight.
Right, it'd be,
There'd be no
yeah,
sunlight.
right, exactly. So that's why I liked the Berkeley policy, and I mentioned this 2 years ago, and I still would like to see that looked at and implemented.
All right.
Actually, there was one minor thing, just a staff thing. In number 36, there's a mention of the Climate Action Plan, and I think it would probably be useful to have a statement as to whether the Climate Action Plan provides objective standards, whether that's one of the objective standards documents or not. That actually has a lot of stuff in it, so.
Yeah, that's actually a pretty comprehensive plan.
I would like to see the study that talks about the species that remove carbon dioxide and particulates from the air. And while I don't, argue that, plants will help filter the air, it's my understanding that there was a limited study in an enclosed area, and that a great deal was made of it. So I would like to see the studies about this. Before we go and, tell people that they need to be planting certain species, I'd like to have more data about that.
All right. 41, dark sky. Seems fine to me. Anyone else? Commissioner Moore? Something?
Well, this is challenging. If you consider, for instance, Apple headquarters, and if you've driven by at night, it's very well lit. There's issues with bird safety, and they don't have the fritting on the glass or any other frosting on it like I had seen up at the Facebook headquarters for bird safety. So I think this would be really challenging because you have existing structures which are not following these policies. So, I think it's a great goal, but I think it's going to be a challenge.
42, replacement trees.
I found this to be an odd one. There are a bunch of rules that exist today that talk about, replacement trees. I think it was just a question here of whether this was overly, will it end up being overly restrictive?
I think the way this reads, it looks like trying to keep from having trees put on a roof is the first thing that comes to mind for me. And then the second thing is some of the replacement trees for one of the Valco plans, and I don't recall which one it is, but I had heard some complaints that the trees were a lot smaller, what they were requiring to replace. And people were disappointed about that. They wanted to have something more like what you saw go in at Apple headquarters, with those huge, it looked like 10 by 10 box trees went in.
Yeah, there were 10 bucks.
So, it just seems like, trying to place trees, replacement trees going to the same areas that they, in the same areas as the trees that are being replaced. It seems like it's counterproductive if you're actually trying to do something here. So I'm not quite sure what the point was here. I think they should get struck.
Well, I think you could probably reword it if the issue is that the residents would like to have larger replacement trees put in, then
I think the grade is part of the issue. That's part of it as well, the grading it. From how this is
well,
written. Like,
know.
is it on a flat level? Is it, somewhere else?
well, my take on it is that they were trying to get away from counting a tree on a roof as being a replacement tree, or a much smaller tree on a roof being a replacement tree for something else in the development.
See, I'm surprised, actually. I would say it was probably the other way, that it's more likely that they would count a tree on the roof. It's just, I don't know. There's a lot of things here that are kind of saying, I just want it to be the way it was.
Right.
Which, it's not clear. I don't think that there's a place for that here. I mean, there's reasonable replacements. There's a, landscape review. That's probably one of the things I should have complained about. Landscape design review. This seems overly restrictive.
Well, I think you could probably convince people to go with a green wall as opposed to this suggestion. If the issue is they don't want to have a replacement tree be on a roof, would they be amenable to a green wall instead, or some other alternative?
Is that your proposal, or is it just a comment?
Well, I had brought it up during the public storage meeting, to look into having a green wall instead, since they had a very limited side yard. So, yeah, we can strike this, but, I would be prepared to see these alternatives brought up when we're looking at projects coming forth in the future.
Well, so I guess I would see it as there is a pretty standard and pretty effective policy for tree replacement today. That people may try to do additional things in the future. But, having this, there's never any reason not to consider something that somebody chooses to apply in the future. It's just kind of creating an extra requirement seems odd.
Well, I think that the resident request to have larger replacement trees, if there's some way that we could, get that happening, that might work.
Trees do get bigger over time. I mean,
Right, but when you're talking about, trying to restrict water and look at native trees which grow slowly, you need to, if you start with something larger, like we've seen at Apple Park, how does that campus look now, considering they brought in such huge trees? It looks like a mature area.
Yeah. Apple Park is not a normal standard for constructing anything, right? Because it's not a structure you could build if you were actually looking for, if you were looking at how much it costs.
So you're saying that we can't ask for something better because what Apple did was just so great that we have to not have that?
No, I think the comment is more along the lines of a tree's cost is somewhat exponential to the size of the tree due to how long the grower has to actually grow and transplant that tree, and then the transportation and then the planting of the tree significantly grows with the size of the tree. So the question really to me is, how much of a burden is it on the applicant in terms of demanding very, very large trees versus 24-inch box, for example. So I think that's just something that needs to be discussed from the standpoint of what does that impact? What does that cost truly?
I think that's something that staff would have to tell us, because we're speculating at this point.
Well,
I'm just
yeah,
gonna.
but
I'm
the
gonna.
question is whether you're increasing the standard to which people are expected to build. I mean, I think that's really nobody prevents you from putting a very, very large tree in your project if you choose to do so, right? And in fact, I mean, if there was something that prevented that, you want to look at that. But
I mean,
the
I
requirement
might if it encroaches on my shade, right? I mean, that may happen on the other way. So I mean, there's some implications there. Can we guys get rid of this?
Yeah.
All right, let's move on. 43, reconsider landscape review process.
Maybe I did put that in.
Yeah, you did, actually. Any comments?
Move on to the next one.
Okay, what's the next one? 44.
44 is another one that is dependent on the,
Kill it. Kill 44. 45, did we discover that we couldn't address this one because we don't have jurisdiction, or were we going to reword it?
I think it's good to have, in the areas in which we have jurisdiction, we should have better standards. So I think that that's actually good.
Okay.
This was just completely, in terms of making things clear, the objective standard clear, that we have a statement about external jurisdiction approvals.
So we have our standards, but we have our expectations, but someone else is setting the standards. Is that what you're saying?
And I think when you set up a fire truck turnaround, that's just, the fire department decides that, it's not us.
It's not us.
Yeah.
That's what I thought.
So you conceivably, you could have looked at the city's objective driveway standards and then failed the fire department test. And there just needs to be some statement that says, this will surprise no one that the fire department is going to have jurisdiction.
Commissioner?
I think the emergency response time is particularly important because we have an aging population, and if you've looked into stroke center time, that you really need to have this looked at, because in the issue of someone having a stroke, that it
Every second.
really, exactly, every second
Every second
counts.
matters in that case. Okay, 46, infrastructure.
This is a sewage question. I think that this is one that was the question that was asked without really knowing the answer. The staff gave a pretty good answer here, so I think we should strike this.
Anyone else?
This kind of gets into what the Cupertino Sanitary District is working on right now. In fact, last week they voted to increase the residential and commercial sewage fees, and then they're looking at the, on July 17th, they'll be looking at the developer impact fees, which were recently raised really, really high, and now they're looking at scaling those back. So this is really being handled by another agency.
Are you suggesting that we take that out? I think so, too. Okay. We have no other items. The parks items were all moved up, and the miscellaneous items we kind of took out. And we have public comment. Jennifer Griffin. If you have none, it's fine. It's okay. Okay. Well, that too. All right. But the Planning Commission has gone over all items in Phase 2, and we've completed that review. Now it's time for public comment. Jennifer Griffin.
Okay. First of all, now that I understand what's going on, okay. You guys really went through this well. I know there's no one here, but I really enjoyed the discussion tonight about everything, because all of this stuff needs to be discussed. Believe me, it keeps me, I wake up in the middle of the night having heart palpitations about things that are happening in Sacramento, and I'm really glad to hear this discussed because no one else is talking about it. And you all are a group of esteemed individuals in the city, and I'm glad you discussed it, and I'm glad that I'm here with you. Okay, first of all, that thing that we just talked about, the sewage issues with Wolf, that's exactly what I'm talking about. I made up a page of things that I'm going to talk about in oral communications to the city council whenever they meet again. I'm sorry, I have one ear that's completely stuffed up, so I can't hear very well. Aggressive future planning. Okay, yeah, you start loading in, poor old Capitola's getting 600 housing units with what, 1,500 new people, 10% of the population's going up. Cupertino can be vertically loaded at Valco with 5 to 10,000 housing units. God knows what's going to happen at the Oaks. San Jose right now and Mountain View are rezoning their R1s next to urban and next to high density. They're doing, quote, modest changes to R1, which I don't even think the public knows about. I mean, a lot of this stuff is just bizarre. It's like done in secret. So we may have, I mean, God forbid, we're having the urban zombie we're having things happening in Sacramento where we're having to give up control of our city manager stuff to some oversight board from Sacramento that's going to be deciding how the BMR units are dispersed around a project in Cupertino. Give me a break. Okay, so let's talk about toilets. Okay, we're going to have 5,000 housing units at Valco. Well, how many toilets will that be? That's probably, I don't know, 5 times 3, that's 15,000 toilets at Valco? My God, the sewage line is going to explode. I mean, I'm sorry. This is part of future planning, and we need to talk about it. I don't know where my future planning thing comes up in here, but we're the planning commission, and if somebody doesn't start talking about this, no one else is going to talk about it. So I'm glad you guys are talking about it, and I voted yes to have the sewage thing for my property. Okay, yes, I applaud what you're doing. We need to talk about this stuff. I made notes here. Are we having 2 more meetings on this?
No, I think
It
we're
said
done.
in here that we were having 3 meetings on level 2. This was in the staff notes. How many meetings are we supposed to, it said we were supposed to have that was right in the staff
I think
notes.
that said we have had 3 meetings.
We've been talking, I remember 1 meeting.
And then with the meeting last week, and then this is the third.
But we've only are we going to have another meeting on this?
I don't think so. We're trying to get it to council as fast as we can.
Okay,
No.
see, I thought we were having 3 meetings.
That was only if this item were to bleed over into a separate
Oh,
meeting. Then we
okay.
will
So
hold
I need, anything that I have, I need to start sending emails to the city council
To
about
council.
things we were talking about. But anyway, all this stuff, the things you were talking about the impact, the LOS, and the et cetera, I mean, there were stuff in there you guys were talking about, and I'm just like, okay, these are all comments that are really, really good. And the park stuff, I mean, I'm really glad we're talking about this because no one else has talked about it. We're sitting on the east side with 1/2 acre park. I don't know how many times I need to say this, but we have no parks, okay? So, yeah, we need to talk about this stuff, and then if the rest of Cupertino doesn't want to hear about it, they need to hear about it. The east side is being loaded and exploded and densified, and we are taking all of the heat and flack. So, yes, we need to have some considerations, and that Dumbstern Hotel, yes, we need to start telling these other cities our expectations. And with this new city council, we will say to San Jose, do not put anything higher than 45 feet on our borders, because Campbell told San Jose at their Winchester Urban Village meeting they did not want anything higher than 45 feet. So we need to draw our line in the sand and start saying this, and we need to start saying to Sacramento, you take our local control away, we will find ways to take it back. If it means recalling politicians, recalling the governor, and taking back our democracy. Because everything I have been seeing for the last 2 or 3 years is socialist takeover of my city. And I want my city back. Thank you.
Thanks, Jennifer. Okay. Any old business? Any comments on our end? Sorry.
I would like to make a comment after
Yeah. Commissioner Moore?
what Jennifer had to say. One thing that concerns me about the housing bills is whether or not they're going to be dismantling the Subdivision Map Act, because the Subdivision Map Act ensures that adequate public services will be provided to new subdivisions. And if that is dismantled, I'm very concerned about how the public services are going to be paid for and how our infrastructure is going to be maintained.
Okay, any other comments from commissioners? All right, old business, I don't think we have any. New business, I think we're okay. All right, staff and commission reports? No reports? Any other comments you want?
We had a couple activities. I'll blurt them out just because it recognized some people who were ex-Cupertino folks. On the 14th of June, I attended the Silicon Valley Leadership Group Energy and Sustainability Summit. Really quite amazing. They had a number of different things. There was a breakout panel for talking about electrifying everything, which had overviews of things they're doing at Stanford around sustainable energy and Google. We talked a little before the meeting about there's a new Google office building. It's 800,000 square feet. It doesn't have heating and cooling. It's done by using the earth as a heat pump. Also, they had a sustainability session there. And one of the speakers was Erin Cook, who many of you may know. She was here, the sustainability manager and the deputy city manager here. She's now the in charge of transportation at San Francisco Airport. And that was really great. Attended the Emergency Preparedness Fair. Wanted to tip my hat to the Public Safety Commission and the departments and the staff who put that on. It was entertaining. I attended the Pride Recognition, the raising of the flag on the 25th. And to Dave Knapp's memorial on the 29th.
All right, thank you, Commissioner Fung. Commissioner Moore? Anything on you? Nope.
Okay.
Reports or?
Well, I've been attending the Cupertino Sanitary District meetings, and I was there on July 3rd, and they voted to increase our rates, which will be on our taxes, and I'd like to just put up one slide so that you can get a sense for where Cupertino stands in relation to our surrounding cities. So just real quickly, Cupertino is at the absolute bottom for our sewer charge comparison. So I don't think that we should be too surprised that our rates are going to be going up. We will end up in the middle of the pack, which appears to be really appropriate. The other issue that they were looking at was a restaurant was looking at going into Main Street, replacing an existing restaurant, and the way the fees had gone up, the developer impact fees went from about $10,000 to $150,000. So on July 17th, they are going to be looking at that again to adjust it because it is such a heavy burden on this new restaurant. And we're talking about just a 4,200 square foot space, $150,000. That's all I have to say. Thanks.
Okay, Commissioner Takahashi? Okay. I've been visiting a lot of locales and some interesting suburban designs, and I think there's a lot to be learned from how they built out Frisco, Texas. I think there's a lot of interesting things on how they build new development, and one of the things that people may have noticed is that there's a new flight to suburbs again that's going on. So I think it's worth for people to kind of take a look to see what creating a modern suburb looks like and what that should be. So other than that, any other comments from everyone else? All right, with that, we adjourn today's meeting. Thanks for attending and watching.